Hey guys, Chaos Shinobi here. This is a story where Naruto has a dojutsu that is not the Sharingan, Rinnegan, or Byakugan. This ocular power was lost in time and Naruto is the first to have it in many years. Now let's begin. Chapter 14. Up in the stands, Chizuru was confused when the announcer stated that the next match would be between Rei and Lee. Wanting to get some answers, Chizuru turned to her left and looked at Jiraiya, who was in the row behind her. After politely coughing to get Jiraiya's attention, Chizuru politely said, "Lord Jiraiya, why is my cousin fighting again when there are 4 other Chunin hopefuls that have not yet fought today?" Jiraiya, who had a secret fatherly soft spot for preteens, gave Chizuru an honest smile and started to explain what was going on. You see, Chizuru, the tournament is fought in rounds. If you were to look at the matches on a piece of paper, you would see that the 4 matches we just watched are on lower level than Naruto's starting match. What's done in this case is the matches on the lower tier are fought first and then the next round starts. Chizuru nodded her head and then politely said, "Thank you, Lord Jiraiya, for explaining that to me." Upon seeing Chizuru bow, Jiraiya let out a small chuckle and he said, "Don't worry about it, Chizuru. If there's anything else that I can help you understand when you're watching the tournament, just let me know." Jiraiya then turned his attention back to the area where he just barely got to see Lee go flying into the stadium wall due to Rei using a variant of the 1000 Years of Pain with her Naginata. There were only 2 things that Jiraiya knew of that would make Rei use a technique like that on a guy. Either Lee had attempted to get Rei to go out with him and hadn't gotten a clue, or Lee had said something to the effect that he wouldn't fight his hardest due to her being a girl and thus something to be treated with delicacy. Since Jiraiya hadn't seen any sign of Rei-tun, he was assuming that it was option number 2. The sight of Lee embedding into the concrete wall made Jiraiya want to go down to where Guy was sitting and strangle the fitness fool. Every genin with over a year's worth of experience should automatically know that all opposing ninjas are to be treated as being at least as skilled as the genin themselves. That Lee had made such a rookie mistake and in front of the dignitaries was completely inexcusable on Guy's part. After the proctor called the match with Rei as the winner, Jiraiya glared at the unconscious Lee until the medics carried him off of the field. The reason Jiraiya was glaring was because in his mind Lee represented all that was wrong in the majority of the ninjas that the academy was churning out in the past few years. In Jiraiya's mind, the academy wasn't training the kids in the mentality one needed to be a great ninja. Lee had a great drive to become a great ninja even with his disability, and Jiraiya respected that. However, Jiraiya felt it was the academy's fault for not teaching Lee about the need to be silent. Also, and Jiraiya grumbled as he thought about it, Lee's academy teacher should have pointed Lee in the direction of making traps and kenjutsu to diversify his abilities as a ninja. The next scheduled match was supposed to be between Temari and Gaara. Unfortunately for the fight-eager crowd, Temari had immediately forfeited her match. Therefore, the announcer moved on to the next scheduled match. Alright then, folks. This next match is between Naruto Uzumaki and Tenten Shiranui. Mississippi Shiranui happens to have the best eye among all Konoha genin when it comes to throwing weapons. In fact, there are rumors that she once used a senbon needle to pin a fly through its wings at 50 yards. For her opponent, Miss Shiranui will have to face Naruto Uzumaki. Young Naruto is an orphan whose file is heavily classified for a genin. Which one of these 2 fine young genin will be advancing to the next round? Proctor, you may start the match. Down in the arena, Naruto gave Tenten a small head nod of respect. As he brought his head up from the bow, Naruto said, "I hope you don't mind, Miss Shiranui, but I won't be going easy on you for this fight." This statement of Naruto's caused a flicker of a smile to cross Tenten's face. She had expected that Naruto would most likely fight her all out. With a girlfriend like that Rei girl who apparently had zero tolerance for being treated like she couldn't fight a serious battle because she was a girl, Tenten figured that any macho attitudes that Naruto may have possibly had were driven from him already. Still, Tenten was happy that Naruto had said what he said just the same. All too often in her training, Tenten had seen Guy or Lee unconsciously lighten the severity of their attacks, and that annoyed her. Just because women tended to be a little weaker than men physically does not mean that a guy should automatically hold back when fighting a girl. As far as Tenten was concerned, the only reason why an opponent should hold back on her was if that person was either trying to teach her or if that person was an opponent trying to test her limits. When Naruto and Tenten heard the proctor call the start of the match, they both leaped backwards. Since he knew that Tenten was a ranged fighter, Naruto had decided to start off the match on a more defensive stance. A textbook solution to the situation Naruto was in would have called for Naruto to quickly charge at Tenten, closing the gap before she could use her weapons. However, Naruto had long ago thrown out that particular book and substituted his own. The Rinnegan would be able to give him enough of an advantage so he could avoid or deflect any of Tenten's projectiles. This would give Naruto the twofold advantage of being able to spot a good opening and allow both him and Tenten to show the judges that they deserve to be Chunin. Tenten had immediately decided to start her assault on Naruto by throwing a rapid stream of kunai at him. She was throwing those kunai at such rapid speeds that the proctor actually blinked his eyes to make sure that Tenten wasn't using a genjutsu. However, Naruto calmly used Joshua and Gideon to calmly deflect each and every kunai that Tenten sent towards him. While that level of skill on Naruto's part was surprising to Tenten, she didn't let that discourage her. After all, Tenten had known in advance that she might have to face Shinobi that could deflect her normal kunai. As she then jumped high into the air, Tenten called out to Naruto, "I'm impressed, Naruto, that you could deflect that attack. Let's see how you do against this one." With that said, Tenten whipped out a small summoning scroll and caused a small cloud of smoke to appear around her. Naruto carefully looked up at the smoke cloud in puzzlement as if he was trying to discern what Tenten was trying to do. All of a sudden, dozens of senbon needles started to rain down on the field from the cloud that Tenten was in. Quickly making a set of hand signs, Naruto called out, "Underworld Guardian Spikes." However, Naruto's hair wasn't able to grow fast enough to form a shield of protection, and he ended up getting perforated with the senbon needles. Just as she was coming out of her smoke cloud, Tenten saw Naruto fall to ground bleeding profusely from her attack. This sight sent a cold chill down Tenten's spine. She had never meant for something like this to happen. Her attack was only supposed to get past Naruto's defenses and soften him up so she could then fight him hand to hand. That way she could advance and none of her fellow leaf ninjas got seriously hurt. During the preliminaries, she had turned her opponent into a pincushion, but she had done it in such a way that he would be back up to full status in less than a month. No one was supposed to die in this match. Tenten landed on her feet and looked at where Naruto's body laid, wishing that she could have rewind the time back just those few seconds. If she hadn't used the smoke to hide her attack, then she could have aimed more carefully at where Naruto had been. If she had done that, she could have made sure to hit Naruto's pressure points. Now, because of her arrogance, she would have to go up to that competitor's box and face Naruto's girlfriend. How was she supposed to go tell a fellow leaf ninja that she had killed the girl's boyfriend over something as stupid as a title? Just as Tenten was about to turn to the proctor, so she could be grimly told that she would be advancing to the next round, she felt cold steel touch the back of her neck. Tenten was so startled by the fact that a blade was against her neck that she didn't have time to react before a second blade was pressed against her belly. To Tenten's completely shocked mind, she heard Naruto's voice saying, "Call the match, Tenten." There was only one thing that Tenten's shocked mind could at that point. In a trembling voice, Tenten said, "I, Tenten Shiranui, forfeit the match." The proctor nodded his head and then officially stated that Naruto was the winner of the match by forfeit. Once the announcement was official, Tenten felt Naruto withdraw his blades. Tenten then turned to look at where she had thought that Naruto had lain dead and was surprised to see a puddle of mud. She then heard Naruto, who had walked up next to her, calmly said, "When you were in the smoke, I made an earth clone and replaced myself underground with the clone. All of the blood that you saw was due to the shadow clone blood justs, a family technique from my mother's clan." After saying that, Naruto calmly walked towards the exit, leaving a staring Tenten behind him. Looking at Naruto's receding figure, Tenten could only stare in amazement. While she had known there would be some strong competition in the exams that could defeat her, she had never seriously considered that the competition would be in the form of younger leaf ninja. Still, Tenten could honestly say that she didn't truly mind being beaten by Naruto. He had treated her seriously as a ninja since the start of the match and had beaten her because he had the better plan. There was a 30-minute break after Choji won his match against Kiba by growing into a giant and holding Kiba and Akamaru by the scruffs of their necks. During the break, Naruto and Rei could be found in the otherwise empty contestants' box, comfortably sitting next to each other on the floor. Rei currently had her eyes closed and her head was resting on Naruto's shoulder. She then gave Naruto's hand a little squeeze and she said with a little trepidation in her voice, "I'm scared, Naruto. I honestly don't know if I'm strong enough to face Gaara." Gently running his free hand through her hair, Naruto softly said, "It's all right to be scared, Rei. Gaara's abilities scare me as well. However, I have full faith in you, Rei, that you can handle your next match. With your bloodline, your knowledge of seals, and your information on Jinchuriki, I know that you are the worst opponent for Gaara to face besides Akage. Just remember that you can always leave the match if you feel too uncomfortable with how things are going." These words brought a small smile to Rei's face and she cuddled a little closer to Naruto. In a now calm voice, Rei said, I don't know what's with me today, Naruto. First I jumped down on that Lee kid because of what he said, and now I was just nearly scared senseless because of my opponent. Naruto just calmly nuzzled Rei's ear and reassuringly said, "Everything is alright, Rei. I know that you normally keep a strong control over your emotions, and to be honest, that's one of the many things that I like about you. However, it's alright for you to have your emotions out for everyone to see once in a while. Lee simply got under your skin because you don't like the idea of weak fangirl ninjas, and he was unintentionally, or at least I think it was unintentionally, implying that you were in that group. As for your fear of Gaara, that's understandable as well, Rei. He's shown himself to be very ruthless against his opponents so far, and he is very powerful. The fact that it's likely that Gaara is a Jinchuriki only complicates the problem for you, Rei. Your experiences with Jinchuriki so far have been reading your family chronicles and dealing with me. It's only natural that you would feel nervous before going into battle with a foe that you know is very powerful. Only a fool would go into battle against a person like Gaara and not be at least a little nervous." Once Naruto stopped talking, the young couple just enjoyed the comfortable silence between them. Rei in particular was enjoying the soothing aspect of the tender moment they were in. She felt all of her worries wash away from her and was thankful that she had such a wonderful boyfriend. Unlike what most of the girls in her age group dreamed about when they imagined a perfect boyfriend, Naruto was not some shining knight on a white horse. Naruto also didn't just lavish her with praise about how she looked or go out of his way to give her fancy romantic dates and gifts. Rei knew that most of those girls would be shocked and possibly outraged that Naruto's gifts had mostly consisted of uncommon, but still beautiful, wild flowers and a few whittled figurines that Naruto had made. Naruto's idea of a romantic evening was a long walk through the woods and then watching the stars from the Hokage monument. The idea of going out to a fancy restaurant and then going to the best nightclubs in the village probably never crossed Naruto's mind. As for comments about her looks, Naruto would usually just give her an appreciative glance once, maybe twice during their dates, and he would tell her that she looked great for the evening. However, to Rei, Naruto's romantic ideas were perfect. Those flowers and hand-made wooden statues meant more to her than a string of pearls casually bought ever could. Rei had never really cared too much about how she looked, and while she was happy that Naruto liked how she looked, she preferred that fact that Naruto was more concerned about her as a person instead of what she looked like. Their relationship was more like an old couple that had been around for a long time than a pair of teens who had been together for a little less than a month. Rei, unlike most of the girls in her age group, preferred this kind of a relationship over the fast-paced whirlwind romance that was written about in novels which quickly burnt out in real life. With the break over, the announcer called out as Rei and Gaara entered the arena. "We have now arrived at the semi-finals, everyone. In this match, the elegant Rei Higurashi from Konoha will be facing off against the ruthless Gaara of the desert from Suna. Will Rei be able to avenge her teammates' defeat, or will Gaara plow through Rei on his way to the finals? Let's find out. Proctor, you can start the match." Down in the area, Gaara was starting to grin like a maniac. In a slightly sadistic voice, he said just loud enough for Rei to hear, "You're the key. With your pain, with your suffering, he will be drawn out. The one by whose death I will prove my existence once and for all." With that said, Gaara sent his sand rushing out towards Rei at breakneck speed, completely ignoring the fact that the match hadn't been officially called yet. For her part, Rei had reacted instantly as soon as Gaara started to talk by starting to move backwards. The instant she saw Gaara start to attack without waiting for the proctor, Rei started to fear for her life. It was obvious to Rei that Gaara wanted to fight Naruto, and he didn't care what he did to draw Naruto out into the field. Rei knew that she was no longer in a tournament. She was right in the middle of a war zone. As the air rapidly filled with Gaara's ever-increasing killing intent, Rei quickly thought about what she should do to make it out of this match. With her knowledge of seals, there was the chance that she could create a seal that could calm Gaara down enough that she could make it through the match. However, making such a seal would take several seconds of concentration, and those were seconds that Gaara obviously wasn't about to give her. Luckily for Rei, she had a way to get those precious seconds. While nimbly dodging a pillar of Gaara's sand, Rei bit her thumb and called out in mid-jump, "Summoning Jutsu!" Instantly a cloud of smoke formed around Rei, and she then appeared out of the smoke cloud riding on the back of a raven. As she clung to the raven's back using her chakra to anchor herself to the bird, Rei said, "Please keep away from our foe below us. I need time to create a seal to stop this madness before it goes too far." The raven Rei was riding simply nodded its head and took to the skies. Down in the arena, Gaara was loosing his last holds on his sanity. His mother had told him about the one she wanted him to kill, and she had told him that this person had a great deal of hidden power. Gaara had observed the one called Naruto who his mother was talking about. That boy's actions had showed Gaara that Naruto had some form of attachment to his current opponent. Thanks to his mother, Gaara knew that by hurting Rei he would be able to draw Naruto out. Up in the sky, Rei was lying on her back furiously working on a seal to stop Gaara. For ink, Rei had chosen to use her own blood that she had saturated with her chakra. This was done so that her seal would be extra powerful due to her bloodline. Finishing up on the last stroke of the needed kanji, Rei then swung around so that she was sitting on her raven's shoulders. Rei then shouted out to her summoned ride, "The seal is complete! I now need you to get as close to Gaara as you can so that I can throw this seal at him." The raven's only response was to sharply bank to the right towards Gaara. As the raven took her closer towards Gaara, Rei felt her fear start to rise up in her. Part of her couldn't believe that she was doing something as reckless as flying straight towards an enraged Jinchuriki. Her family may have a history of trying to do as much as they could to help the poor souls that were cursed to become Jinchuriki, but even then the Higurashi knew that facing an enraged Jinchuriki head-on was pretty stupid. However, Rei knew that she needed to get in close enough so that she could send the seal at Gaara and make sure that he didn't dodge it. Her eye carefully trained on Gaara as she was carried through the air. Rei was watching for precisely the moment to throw the seal. Finally, she spotted her opening and she smirked as she threw the seal at Gaara and ordered her summons to pull up. Thanks to excess chakra that was infused in the paper, the seal cut through the air and landed on Gaara's face. Turning her head back to look at her handiwork, all the color in Rei's face drained in an instant. Instead of seeing Gaara's sand falling to the ground and Gaara knocked unconscious like she was expecting, Rei saw something terrifying. The sand that Gaara used was starting to coalesce on Gaara in the shape of the one-tailed demon while brown lighting started to shoot out from around the seal Rei had created. For some reason, Rei's seal was apparently increasing Gaara's access to his Biju instead of decreasing it and knocking him out. Suddenly Rei remembered an old lesson on seals that her grandfather had told her once. "Oh no!" Rei whispered to herself as she looked down at Gaara. "Don't tell me that the seal holding back the Biju is an odd-number seal." She had never even considered the possibility that Gaara's seal was an odd-number seal, because Rei knew that no person in their right mind would use such a seal on a living creature. It was a basic principle of seal making, odd for inanimate objects and even for living beings. Using an even-number seal on an inanimate object or using an odd-number seal on a living being would just cause the seal to degrade and mutate unpredictably. Since a Jinchuriki sacrifice can only be a few days old at max for even the weakest demon, Gaara's seal had to have been degrading and mutating for years. Rei knew that it was possible to use an even-number seal on a person who had an odd-number seal in order to stop the effects of the odd-number seal. However, the seal she had used wasn't that sort of seal, and even if her seal was, it was inadvisable to mess with a seal that was in such a state of decay. There was only one thing that Rei could think of doing as she watched Gaara's demonic transformation. Gaara was now entirely covered in his demonic sand and his new demonic form was rapidly growing by the second. Rei cupped her hands to her mouth and screamed out at the top of her lungs, "Everyone leave the stadium now!" All over the stadium everyone had been feeling the effects of Gaara's massive killing intent. Most of those civilians and ninjas from Konoha, who could remember the Kyuubi's attack 14 years ago, had started to become paralyzed with fear. They all knew that it was the power of a Biju that they were feeling and they were terrified. Kyuubi's assault on the village had cost Konoha over a third of the ninja corps along with the Yondaime. None of them wanted to even try to imagine what another demonic assault in the middle of the village would cost them. As soon as Rei shouted out her warning, pandemonium broke loose in the stands. The civilians started to run towards the exits screaming their heads off. Many of the genin, at least those who weren't running towards the exits as fast as the civilians, were hurriedly helping those civilians who were too scared to move escape. The higher-level ninjas, many of who had previous experience with handling demonic killing intent, started to unleash a barrage of jutsus. They had nearly lost their home once before to a Biju. They would not allow their home to be lost this time. Up in the Kage stand, Sarutobi turned to look at the Kazekage and Sarutobi saw the Kazekage's fear. In a scathing voice Sarutobi said, "You knew something like this could happen, didn't you, Kazekage?" The Kazekage turned to Sarutobi and shot back. "Of course I knew that something like this would happen, you old fool. This happened twice already before. However, if your stupid little genin hadn't done whatever the hell it was she did, then this wouldn't have happened to my weapon for another 3 to 4 years. Besides, I would have killed the thing before it gotten to this point. Now instead of getting S-rank missions out of my weapon, I have to make another one." It took all of Sarutobi's strength of will not to puke or kill his fellow Kage. As a father and as a human being, Sarutobi couldn't believe that the Kazekage could talk like that about his own flesh and blood. It was one thing to create a Jinchuriki like Minato did with Naruto in order to keep a demon from harming people. However, the Kazekage had just admitted that he had turned his own son into a Jinchuriki so he could have a money-making weapon. Putting his companion's poor parenting skills to the side for the moment, Sarutobi thought about what to do to defend Konoha. In all honesty, he couldn't really think of anything that he could do that would be useful. The only thing that he could think to do at the moment was to pray and hope that a solution would present itself. Naruto looked out from the contestant box at growing Shikaku and cursed at himself. He had been so busy observing Rei with his remote viewing ability to make sure that she wasn't hurt that he hadn't used his prescience abilities to gain an early warning that this would happen. If he had thought ahead and used his prescience abilities, then he could have stepped in and warned Rei not to use the seal. In an indirect way, this demonic attack was his fault. Removing his sunglasses from his face, Naruto took a second to stare at the glasses. Why did he really have those sunglasses in the first place? Was it really so he could surprise people when he used the Rinnegan, or was it something else? Could it be that he was subconsciously afraid of what other people thought about his abilities and him? Had he been hiding his true abilities out of fear that people would reject him? Naruto then crushed his sunglasses with a single hand and he activated his Rinnegan. No more would he hide his abilities from everyone but those closest to him. If those around him rejected him because of his abilities, oh well. He had friends, family, and a love now. He would fight with all his might to protect those people who were so precious to him, and he would never stop and worry if someone else besides those people saw his abilities. In a calm voice, Naruto called out, releasing binding seal level to level 8. Instantly, Naruto felt the immense power that his seals were holding back start to pump through his being. A small light pink manifestation of chakra started to emanate from Naruto, while at the same time his jacket came unzipped and the ends of it started to wave around as if in a breeze. Naruto confidently stepped out of the contestant's box and then majestically jumped up onto the roof of the box. Everyone who was still in the stadium paused for a moment and they turned and looked at Naruto. Many of them were wondering about the strange pink aura that was emanating from Naruto and what it might mean. In a clear voice that cut through the silence and suffocating atmosphere of the stadium, Naruto said, "Gaara, if it's a fight with me that you want, then it's a fight you shall have." Naruto looked out on the demonic visage of Shikaku, and yet he felt no fear at the sight. It wasn't because Naruto was foolhardy or believed that he would defeat the possessed Gaara. Rather, it was because in that moment Naruto knew what he had to do and placed his trust in his training. Also, Naruto knew that even as inexperienced as he was one of the few people who had the power to stop this demonic attack. Using his Rinnegan, Naruto quickly determined the best course of action he could do and jumped into the air. While in the air, Naruto quickly made a series of hand signs and called out, "Earth Release, Swamp of the Underworld." The pink aura surrounding Naruto dimmed for just a second due to the power that Naruto put into his jutsu. All the ninjas in the stadium looked on in surprise as almost the entire arena was transformed by the jutsu. As Naruto landed on railing between the seats and the arena below, he made an unknown hand sign and said, "Ninja Art, Whirlpool of the Underworld." Slowly, the muddy swamp water below Naruto started to spin and got increasingly faster as Naruto held the jutsu's hand sign. Whirlpool of the Underworld was one of Jiraiya's original jutsus and was designed to complement Earth Release, Swamp of the Underworld. By transforming the resulting swamp from the first jutsu into a whirlpool of the Underworld was able to capture enemies that might have otherwise escaped from the Swamp of the Underworld jutsu. Jiraiya normally just stuck with the Swamp of the Underworld because of the high chakra cost that the Whirlpool of the Underworld had and the fact that most things couldn't escape the swamp. However, Biju manifestations fell under that small list of creatures that could escape from the swamp. Naruto had seen this fact and had thus used the Whirlpool of the Underworld to prevent Shikaku from escaping. As Naruto watched his jutsu take effect, he couldn't help but grin. Shikaku now had to use a good portion of his yokai just to keep from being sucked completely into the muddy whirlpool. Also, Shikaku now had trouble finding material to turn into sand because the whirlpool itself was preventing Sukaku from using the ground beneath him as new sand. While holding the final hand seal of his jutsu in place, Naruto quickly scanned the arena. Upon seeing that many of the ninjas in the arena were looking at the sight of the trapped Shikaku in shocked silence, Naruto started to get annoyed. He then yelled out at the top of his lungs, "How about a little help here?" This shook many of the ninjas out of their stupor, and very soon they started to attack Shikaku with various long-range jutsus. Naruto was doing his best to sustain the whirlpool of the underworld because he knew that it would help to buy more time for someone else to figure out how to defeat Shikaku. While Naruto knew he had the power to possibly defeat Shikaku, he did not want to try and actually subdue the great beast. Any battle between him and the one-tailed demon would end in a Pyrrhic victory at best due to the fact that such a battle would be a power versus power battle. It would be safer for Konoha if Naruto left dealing with Shikaka up to Jiraiya, Katsudo, or even Rei. About 90 degrees from Naruto, Jiraiya and Katsudo were stoically looking at Shikaku as various ninjas around them futilely tried to defeat the demon. Lenore, who had been summoned by Rei in order to tell her brother what had happened with Seal that she had created, was resting on Katsudo's shoulder. Jiraiya had his hands across his chest, scowled a bit, and said, "Damn that blasted Kazekage. What was that man thinking, purposefully creating a Jinchuriki and then using the wrong type of seal to hold the demon? If he doesn't die in this attack, I'll personally arrange a little accident for him." Katsudo placed his hand on the enraged Toad Hermit and calmly said, "While I agree that Kazekage must be disposed of because of his actions, now is not the time to worry about that. For now, Jiraiya, you and I must concentrate on finding a way to defeat this demon. Besides us, Rei is the only person currently here who has the skill to seal away this demon, and according to Lenore here, Rei won't be attempting to seal away the beast anytime soon. My sister is currently too afraid that she will do more harm than good because of her last attempt at using a seal against Gaara." Jiraiya nodded his head and said, "I agree with you, Katsudo. However, I honestly can't think of what we can do to contain Shikaku. If Tsukaku was completely free or if he was trapped in a normal seal, I would be able to instantly figure out what to do. But this is completely different. How are we supposed to deal with a partially free demon held back by a decaying seal of which we know nothing except for the fact that it's the wrong type and is decaying?" Both seal masters had their musings cut short by a demonic roar that pierced the entire stadium. Apparently Shikaku had decided to stop trying to forcefully escape Naruto's jutsu and was taking another approach. The sand demon was now launching bits of his sand body at the stadium to kill the ninjas that were attacking him. For a second, Jiraiya and Katsudo had been scared that Naruto would either be forced to stop using his jutsu, thereby freeing the beast, or Naruto would be killed due to him being a sitting target. Luckily, two nearby jonins had seen this problem and fixed it by moving next to Naruto so they could create a protective jutsu around Naruto. Temari was currently lying on the cold concrete of one of the stadium exits, terrified for her life. As soon as she had seen that Gaara decided to go all out on that Konoha ninja, Rei, Temari had started to make her way out of the stadium. However, Temari's escape attempt was cut short because Temari had fallen and broken her ankle when she had first felt Shikaku's yokai. Forcing herself to ignore the pain she was in, Temari continued to crawl towards the exit. Unfortunately, Temari didn't manage to escape yet because two of the metal pipes had fallen from the ceiling and had landed on her lower legs. All alone in that hallway and while feeling the shaking of the stadium, Temari started to despair. The pain coming from her legs was making it hard for Temari to think, let alone try and remove the heavy pipes from them. Slowly, a single tear began to roll down her cheek. Was this really it for her? Temari started to wonder. Was she to die alone in this passageway as an indirect casualty of her brother? The very same brother who she had failed to prevent becoming a monster? Temari was startled out of this melancholy by the sound of metal restraints weakening. Looking up in fear, Temari saw that the sound was coming from a set of pipes that were right above her head. With a terrified and breathless gaze, Temari watched in slow motion as one of the pipes came loose and started to fall. This, Temari was sure, was the end of her. If that pipe didn't kill her immediately, the resulting injuries would surely do her in. As the pipe fell towards Temari's head, a voice suddenly called out, "Fire style, Phoenix Claw." Temari then watched as a humanoid blur ran past her with what appeared to be a sword of fire and cut the falling pipe. That pipe was instantly severed in half and the two pieces of it fell harmlessly next to both sides of Temari's face. With the falling pipe taken care of, Temari's rescuer sheathed his sword and turned around so that Temari could see his face. To Temari's surprise, her rescuer was none other than Iori Kusanagi. Temari then watched as Iori stumbled back a bit and braced himself against the wall opposite of her. There was visible sweat running down Iori's face and he was breathing very heavily. "Still weak from my match," Iori gasped out as he looked at Temari. He then took a moment to finish collecting his breath before continuing on. "I came back this way to make sure that no one was left behind. Good thing I did it." As Iori said that last part, he gave Temari a slightly roguish grin. Despite the immense pain she was in and the seriousness of the situation, Temari couldn't help but smile a little bit at Iori's poor joke. However, The good mood from Iori's joke quickly left Temari when she felt a burst of pain from her legs. Temari then looked Iori in the eye and grunted out, "All right, Mr. Hero. How about you get these pipes off my legs and get the two of us out of here?" Iori nodded his head, walked over to where the pipes were laying on Temari's legs, and leaned down. In a very careful, but appearing to be careless, manner Iori removed the two pipes from Temari's legs. He then turned 90 degrees and scooped up Temari in his arms. On seeing the astonished look on Temari's face, Iori just gave an "I don't care" snort and said, "I'm no medic, but I can tell that there is no way that you're going to be able to walk out of here on your own. Since it would be pointless to just leave you here after saving you from that falling pipe, I'm just going to have to carry you out." With a quiet Temari bridal style in his hands, Iori turned around and started to walk out of the corridor. Iori hadn't made it 20 feet from where Temari had been lying when he saw something that caused him to scowl. The exit out of stadium had collapsed, and in his current condition there was no way that Iori could create his own exit from the rubble. He then looked down at Temari and said, "I don't know about you, princess, but I'd rather try my chances in the lion's den than die down here like a rat." Immediately after saying that, Iori turned around and started walking down the hallway towards the seating of the arena. As Naruto held Shikaku in place, he was also gazing as far into the future as he could in order to gather intel. Suddenly, Naruto saw something that he just instinctively knew had to be acted upon. However, Naruto was immediately confronted with the question of how was he supposed to convey the information without alerting Shikaku? A stray thought caused Naruto just a second later to look at his hands and gave him an idea of how he could get the information across. Before Naruto and Rei had preformed the Feng Shui fusion ritual, Rei had explained that the ritual would graft part of their chakra network into the other person. That was one of the primary reasons why Rei was able to use the ritual to prevent Naruto from using too much purified demon chakra at any particular time. Also, seals allowed the two of them to know when the other was in danger. Naruto's sudden idea was to use the seals that linked him and Rei together in a completely different way. While still making sure that he was keeping the whirlpool of the underworld stable, Naruto directed a tiny fraction of his chakra towards the Feng Shui fusion seals. Then Naruto used every ounce of chakra control that he had. Naruto started to send his diverted chakra into the seals in bursts. After that was done, Naruto was left waiting and hoping that Rei would be able to figure out what he was trying to tell her. Rei was riding on the back of her raven summon circling around Shikaku when she felt a series of pulses coming from the seals on her hands. While Rei was shocked at feeling the pulses, she had been able to keep her wits and she realized that the pulses were battle code. The message that Rei had felt from her seals was extremely simple. Go to grid 4567. Rei placed her trust in Naruto's message and said to her summon, "Bank right now and fly about mid-level around the demon." The Raven Rei was riding silently responded to Rei's command and went to the desired point. Just as Rei and her summon arrived at the location, Shikaku let out a demonic chuckle and said, "Freedom! I'm finally free of this worthless human." With that said, Shikaku spitted out Gaara's body right in Rei's direction. Rei quickly figured out why Naruto wanted her to be in this spot and grabbed Gaara's body out of the air. As Rei secured Gaara's body, she could barely keep herself from crying. There were dozens of lacerations of all different sizes across Gaara's entire body. If it wasn't for the fact that Gaara's wounds were apparently cauterized, he would have likely bled to death within seconds. To Rei's surprise, as she looked at Gaara, she found a single chakra thread connecting Gaara's heart to Shikaku. Rei then immediately checked to see if Gaara still had a pulse. If Gaara was still alive, then the chakra thread connecting him to Shikaku would mean that the demon wasn't completely free yet like he had claimed. After confirming that Gaara was alive, Rei ordered her summon to fly to her brother and Jiraiya. Hopefully those two could figure out something that could be done. Iori walked out of the exit with Temari still in his hands and tried to spot a safe way for him to evacuate the stadium. A quick assessment showed that there was apparently no safe way for him to leave the stadium in his condition while carrying Temari. There was no way in hell that Iori would leave a practically defenseless person to almost certain death in order to save his own skin. Thus Iori started to look around to try and find a reasonably secure place that he could hide with Temari. Very quickly Iori decided that the best location that he could go to at the moment was next to Jiraiya. Iori, while being extremely careful not to move Temari's legs, hunched down and walked towards Jiraiya. Since Iori knew he couldn't defend himself or Temari against Shikaku, he hoped to just the benches of the stadium to hide his movement from the demon. Just as Iori came to where Jiraiya and Katsudo were standing, Rei arrived on her summon carrying Gaara. When Temari saw Gaara's mutilated body being carefully laid on a bench, she felt her heart break and tears started to roll down her cheeks. Temari had been deathly afraid of her youngest brother for years, but she had always loved him dearly. For years Temari had been trying to bring her little brother back from the murderous shell that had formed due to their scumbag of a father. Unfortunately, her father's routine assassination attempts on Gaara and Gaara's forced isolation from the family that dear old dad created had made Temari's attempts practically worthless. Now it seemed that Temari no longer had the chance to try and save her little brother. Iori, who had glanced down at Temari in order to check on her health, instantly spotted her tears and tried to think about what he should do. Having little brothers himself, Iori knew that Temari must be in a lot of pain at seeing Gaara like he was. However, comforting others had never been Iori's strong point, so he was completely lost as to how he could help out the young woman in his arms. Iori then decided that he would completely mess up any verbal attempts at calming Temari down and just carefully placed her on the bench next to where Gaara was lying. While Iori was placing Temari on the bench, the two seal masters and Rei were fiercely debating about what they should do to stop Shikaku. The most practical solution that they could think of, resealing Shikaku into Gaara, was impossible. Gaara's body was so badly damaged that the shock of forcing Shikaku back into the boy would only kill him and release Shikaku again. Trying to seal Shikaku into an object or another person would be pointless due to the fact that the demon was still connected to Gaara. Suddenly Rei snapped her fingers and said, "Why don't we seal Gaara and Shikaku together?" Jiraiya and Katsuro just looked at Rei with blank faces, forcing her to explain her out-of-the-box idea. Gaara is the only person or thing that we can seal Shikaku into for now, and Gaara can't survive the resealing process. If Gaara was dead, we still wouldn't be able to seal Shikaku for several hours due to the remaining effects of Gaara's chakra and the original seal clinging to Shikaku. What I'm suggesting is that we reseal Shikaku into Gaara while at the same time we seal Gaara into an object. The two seal masters turned to look at each other and silently considered Rei's idea. They then turned back towards Rei, and Jiraiya started to speak for both himself and Katsuro. "Rei, that plan of yours is practically insane. We would have to synchronize the two sealings down to the second in order to pull this plan of yours off. Even if we manage to pull off this crazy idea of yours, Konoha could still be in danger. Not even the dead demon-consuming seal can completely lock away two souls into a single object. Either Gaara's or Shikaku's consciousness would still be able to interact slightly with the world through whatever object they would be bound into. What's more, the only way that we could ensure that it was Gaara and not Shikaku who could interact with the world would be to bind the object that the two would be sealed into by this idea of yours to the bloodline of a close family member of Gaara's." "Use me." Jiraiya's little monologue was interrupted, and everyone there minus Gaara, who was unconscious, turned to look at where Temari was sitting. Temari looked Jiraiya in the eye and firmly said while clenching her teeth in pain, "I'm Gaara's sister. If it's the only way to end this nightmare, then take my battle fan, seal the demon and my brother into it, and use my blood to ensure that Gaara's mind is the one that interacts with the world." Jiraiya gave Temari a very serious glare and said, "Are you completely sure? If we do this, then there is no going back. You, your children, and your children's children will forever be bound to that fan of yours, ensuring that Shikaku does not emerge into the world. We can't even predict exactly how Gaara will interact with the world if we do this, besides the fact that he will be able to interact in some form or another. Are you willing to risk something like Gaara possibly possessing you?" Without backing down an inch, Temari firmly glared back at Jiraiya and said, "If I were to become possessed by Gaara, then so be it. My father is the one who caused this mess in the first place, and I will clean it up. Besides, my other brother Kankuro would never volunteer to do this. Now get whatever you need to create the seal and get to it." Jiraiya, Rei, and Katsuro were quickly able to set up everything that they would need for the complex sealing that they were about to do. As the least experienced seal master, Rei was given the easiest job, placing the seals on Temari's fan that would bound the Suna ninja to the fan. Due to the nature of the seals, Rei had to write the seals with a kunai that had its point covered in Temari's blood. At the same time, Jiraiya and Katsuro were placing a giant seal all over Gaara's unconscious body. Once all the seals were written, Temari's battle fan was placed on Gaara's chest, and Jiraiya and Katsuro took their places on both sides of Gaara. Both Jiraiya and Katsuro looked each other in the eyes and then began the sealing process. They went through the same hand signs at the same time and then said with one voice, "Dual 4-point seal merger." Suddenly Gaara's body started to glow while streaks of lighting traveled across the chakra string connecting Gaara and Shikaku. As soon as the lighting hit Shikaku, the giant demon started to shriek and howl in pain. The lighting very quickly started to encase Shikaku, and everyone's amazement actually started to shrink the demon. Then there was bright flash of light and Shikaku disappeared from the arena. Where am I? Gaara uttered in complete confusion as he looked out on the sandy beach in front of him. The last thing that Gaara could remember was being in Konoha Stadium and letting no Shikaku out. Being here was a very strange experience for Gaara. For the first ever that Gaara could remember, he no longer had Shikaku constantly whispering in his ears. As much as Gaara didn't want to admit, this made this place far better than any other place he had ever been in. Gaara was brought out of his serene musing by a pair of arms lovingly wrapping themselves around his neck. Then to Gaara's surprise, he heard his sister's voice coming from behind him. "I'm so glad that I found you in here, Gaara. It was taking me so long to find you that I was starting to get worried that something had gone wrong." Temari then let Gaara out of her hug and walked around so that the two of them could talk face to face. This friendliness that Temari was showing confusing Gaara. While Gaara now knew that he had wanted to be loved and accepted by his family, he was bewildered by Temari's sudden friendly attitude towards him. Shouldn't she be scared for her life when around him, as Gaara remembered when he had last seen Temari? In an innocent questioning voice that he had used since his uncle had tried to kill him, Gaara asked, "What's going on, sis? Where are we?" Temari's face took on a sad expression as she answered her baby brother. "Something very wrong happened during your match with the Konoha ninja Rei. Shikaku was able to escape Gaara and you were dying from the demon's escape. In order to save Konoha, the Toad Sannin Jiraiya and 2 others sealed you and the demon into our mother's battle fan. Don't worry, Gaara, you won't be alone anymore. I've been bound to the battle fan to ensure that it's you and not Shikaku that can interact with the outside world. This place, from what I can tell, is a place where you and can talk. As long as I or one of my descendants is alive, you will never be alone." Gaara looked deeply into Temari's eyes and saw that she was telling the truth. While a part of Gaara was shocked and hurt that he had been trapped in order to defeat Shikaku, another part of him was happy. He wasn't alone anymore because his sister was with him. In a very timid and unsure manner, Gaara then gave Temari a hug and said, "And I'll always ensure that you are protected, big sis." The 2 Sand siblings silently enjoyed the feeling of truly being a family for the first time, even though it was in very unusual circumstances. Once the havoc of Shikaku's attack on Konoha Stadium was over, the entire village just seemed to go into a deep slumber for the rest of the day. Shikaku's attack might have failed with relatively low casualties, but the village just seemed to need to go into a recuperative rest. Even the sky seemed to support Konoha's feeling of tiredness with its clouds and occasional raindrops. Rei was walking down the practically abandoned streets of Konoha towards Naruto's apartment. She was still covered in the dirt and sweat that had accumulated during the exam and subsequent battle. This was because Rei had decided to head straight over to Naruto's apartment after her quick field checkup. When Rei got to Naruto's apartment, she firmly knocked on the door and hoped that Naruto was home. The reason why Rei had headed straight over here was because of the fact that she had seen Sarutobi pull Naruto over to side while she was being given a quick checkup. Once Sarutobi had finished saying whatever it was that he had told Naruto, Naruto's eyes seemed to have lost their usual sparkle. Rei had come over here because she wanted to help comfort Naruto with whatever was distressing him. After waiting a few minutes and not receiving any answer, Rei decided to use the spare key that Naruto had given her to open the door. When Rei walked through the door, she was immediately greeted by the sight of a depressed Naruto sitting on his couch staring blankly at a book that was on his coffee table. This dreary sight caused Rei a great deal of pain and made her all the more determined to help Naruto out. Rei then quietly walked over to the couch, sat down next to Naruto, and gently wrapped her arms around Naruto's neck. In a very soothing and loving voice, Rei whispered into Naruto's ear, "Tell me what's wrong, Naruto. Let me help you get through whatever it is that's bothering you." Naruto then buried his head into Rei's shoulder and hair and started to cry. Slowly, as Rei comforted Naruto, she was able to get the whole story. Sarutobi had pulled Naruto over to the side in order to tell Naruto that his father was Minato Namikaze. Apparently, Sarutobi was going to announce Naruto's lineage to the village at the same time that the new Chunins were announced. Once Rei got over her surprise that Naruto was the Yandame's son, she became confused over Naruto's actions. After gently moving Naruto so that she could look him in the eye, Rei said, "Why are you so upset, Naruto? This is wonderful news. You've finally found out who both your parents are, and soon the whole village will know." "That's just the problem, Rei," Naruto replied with puffed-out eyes. "All my life I have been treated as Konoha's dirty little secret by most of the villagers. Once those people find out who my father was, what are they going to do? I'll tell you what they're going to do. They're either going to deny that the yandere is my father because there is no way in their minds that the demon brat could be related to a hero like the yandere, or they're going to try and kiss up to me. No matter what happens, I'll never be seen as me. I'll always either be the yandere's son or the demon brat. Rei slowly leaned forward to kiss Naruto on the lips while at the same time she gave Naruto a hug. The kiss lasted for a few seconds before Rei broke it off to whisper into Naruto's ear. You have always been and will always be Naruto to me, my love. No matter what the villagers may think of you, I will always think of you like that. To the Hokage, Irika, Iori, Chazua, Konohamaru, and many others, you are not the yandere's son or the demon brat. To us, you are Naruto, our friend, student, family, or love, depending on the person. A comfortable silence descended upon the room for a few minutes after Rei had whispered to Naruto. Rei was the one who broke the silence by saying, "All right then, Naruto. You're still dirty from the battle, so I want you to march into your bathroom and take a shower. While you're doing that, I'll go and order us something to eat." Naruto nodded his head and then took a good look at Rei. In a very unsure and nervous manner, Naruto then said, "What about you, Rei? I mean, you're covered in dirt as well." In her usual caring and yet at times slightly stoic manner, Rei said, "I won't be joining in the shower, Naruto." Rei then watched as Naruto become an impossible to understand gibbering mess, and then she shook her head slightly. She silenced Naruto with a quick peck on the lips and then said, "I always carry a complete outfit with me in one of my storage seals. Once I've called in our dinner and you have finished with your shower, then I'll take a shower as well. Now go and take your shower, mister." Naruto quickly responded to Rei's instructions and headed off to his apartment's bathroom. In the meanwhile, Rei went over to Naruto's phone and called one of the local takeout places that she knew about. Once Rei's order had been confirmed and she was told that dinner would be delivered in 30 to 40 minutes, she headed back over to the couch. The fact that Rei was planning on taking a shower in Naruto's apartment and the fact that she was completely alone except for Naruto didn't bother Rei in the slightest. During long-term missions, she, like all other female ninjas, had to bathe while her male teammates were nearby. Besides, Naruto was a complete gentleman and Rei knew she could trust him not to accidentally walk in on her while she showered or to use his bloodline to get a free show. With the food ordered and Naruto in the shower, there was currently nothing for Rei to do at the moment. To keep herself busy, Rei started to look around Naruto's kitchen/living room. Rei's eyes soon came to rest on the book that was lying on the coffee table in front of her. She then gently picked up the book and read its cover out loud, Uzumaki Clan Codex. For a moment, Rei wanted to put the book back down since it was obviously a private book of Naruto's. However, Rei's curiosity got the better of her this time, causing her to open the book and start reading. About a week after Shikaku's little gig in Konoha Stadium, Team Chusa, along with Shikamaru and Hinata, were assembled in Sarutobi's office. The old Hokage was sitting at his desk and was calmly taking care of some paperwork on his desk while the 5 genins waited for him to say something. After a minute or so of making them wait, Sarutobi looked up from his desk, folded his hands, and started to speak. "I am sure that each of you is probably wondering why I asked for you to come here. Well, I won't waste your time and I'll get straight to the point. After looking at the examiner's notes on you 5 and considering your actions during the Shikaku incident, I have decided that you 5 show the necessary skills needed to become Chunin." Sarutobi got out of his seat, grabbed the Chunin jackets that he had behind his desk out of view, and then started to pass the jackets out. With a smile on his face, Sarutobi said, "It is always my pleasure to be able to hand these jackets out. As you all might realize one day, if you decide to take on any students, there are very few things in this life that are more wonderful than seeing someone reach their potential and knowing that you helped them to achieve that. I have tried my best to ensure that all the ninjas of Konoha can achieve their potential, and I like to consider all of the ninjas here as my students in one form or another." The reactions that each person had to receiving their new jacket and the praise that Sarutobi had given them were different. Hinata had lowered her head and her cheeks were red with embarrassment. Shikamaru had put on his jacket with a sigh and muttered, "So troublesome." Iori put his jacket on in a rather gruff and I don't care manner, but his eyes showed how proud he was to become a Chunin. Rei, in her usual manner, calmly put her jacket on and gave Sarutobi a small head bow. Finally, Naruto's face was practically a beacon of joy as he eagerly put on his jack. Once Sarutobi had been able to get a good look at all 5 of his newest Chunin, he said, "You 5 will have the rest of the week off as per regulations. When you go back on duty, Shikamaru and Hinata will rejoin their old genin teams. You 2 will have to do a good number of D-rank missions still because half of your teammates are still genin. Don't worry about it too much though, because your teams will be able to go on more C-ranked missions. As for Team Chusa, You three will either be doing C-ranked missions by yourselves or be ranked missions with Chusa. With that said, Sarutobi returned to his desk and politely signaled with his hands that the 5 chunins were dismissed. Sarutobi then pulled out a report that Jiraiya had placed on his desk and began to read it. Overall, Sarutobi did not like the looks of what was happening in the West. If what Jiraiya was reporting was true, and Sarutobi was willing to be his entire porn collection that it was, then things in the West were only a hair's breadth away from triggering a 4th ninja war. Sarutobi then pulled out Jiraiya's personal report on Naruto and began to read it. Jiraiya's report showed that Naruto was a rather powerful young ninja with a high learning curve and what seemed to be almost unlimited potential. Along with Earth Release, Swamp of the Underworld and Ninja Art, Whirlpool of the Underworld, Jiraiya stated that Naruto had learned the Rinnegan. This fact was very surprising to Sarutobi considering that it had taken Jiraiya almost half a year to learn the move. But then again, Naruto seemed to specialize in pulling off the impossible. In a more serious manner, Sarutobi placed Jiraiya's report on his desk and turned to look at the photo of Minato hanging in the office. Hidden behind that photo was Minato's greatest legacy to Naruto, the only known scroll in existence that contained instructions for the infamous Flying Thunder God Jutsu. Only Naruto could open the scroll because Minato had rigged it with enough specially designed explosive notes to wipe out Konoha if anyone but Naruto tried to open the scroll. Even using a sample of Naruto's blood wouldn't work because Minato had apparently created a chakra sensing seal that added a new layer of complexity to the seal. As Sarutobi looked at that photo and thought about the scroll hidden behind it, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of regret. While the reasons he had told Chusa about why he had created Team Chusa were correct and were mostly why the team was formed how it was, there was another reason why that team had been fashioned in such a manner. Konoha would need new heroes to help inspire future generations and show them what it truly meant to be a leaf ninja. Team Chusa was to fill that role and be a sort of Nidaime Sannin to replace the original Broken Trio. Naturally, Sarutobi hadn't and would never manipulate the members of Team Chusa or any other ninja under his command. He had simply seized an opportunity that had arisen and had trusted his gut instinct. Once Naruto and his teammates showed that Sarutobi's gut had been correct, the old leader had simply given them a few missions that offered the team the chance to reach their potential. Focusing even harder on Minato's image, Sarutobi wrestled with a very serious question that no matter how it turned out would leave him with a very sour taste in his mouth. Minato had specifically stated that Naruto was not to be given the Flying Thunder God Jutsu until the boy was a Jonin. This was because Minato wanted to make sure that Naruto would have the maturity to handle a jutsu that could potentially lay low entire divisions of ninjas. The Rinnegan Minato hadn't been as worried about because it wasn't nearly as dangerous as the Flying Thunder God could be. However, Sarutobi was seriously considering breaking his word even though the very thought made him ill and giving Naruto the Flying Thunder God now. With how things in the West were going, Konoha would need a little extra insurance. Konoha would need the Yellow Flash. Naruto having that jutsu most likely wouldn't affect the chance of a war breaking out in the West. But if Naruto had that jutsu and could use it properly, he could possibly scare IWA into staying out of any possible wars with Konoha. Having IWA stay out of a possible future war could very well prevent the current crisis from escalating into a 4th Great Ninja War. What was he to do? If Sarutobi gave Naruto the Flying Thunder God Jutsu now, he would be breaking his solemn word. But if he didn't give Naruto the jutsu, then he would potentially be responsible for many of his ninjas' deaths. Sarutobi gave Minato's photo one last glance and then he sadly shook his head. "I'm so sorry, my old friend," Sarutobi said in a mournful tone. "But hopefully you will understand. As Hokage, the village's safety comes before personal wants and needs." Sarutobi then looked away from the picture as if he no longer felt worthy to look at it. As soon as Jiraiya came back into town, Sarutobi promised to himself Naruto would be given the Flying Thunder God Jutsu. Naruto, Rei, and Iori were at their usual training ground practicing. Today was the trio's last day of leave before they started their duties as Chunin, and they had wanted to get in some group training. Currently, the boys were sparring with each other while Rei sat off to the side slightly and practiced creating more complex seals. After Rei put the finishing touch on the seal she looked up and watched the boys spar before her. She continued to discreetly watch the match for a few minutes until Naruto activated the Rinnegan. The sight of the Rinnegan reminded Rei about what she had read in the Uzumaki clan codex, and she started to blush before she turned her gaze away. Rei had only read a small section of the codex, but it was the section on the Rinnegan. Thanks to her hearing and a little bit of luck, Rei had been alerted to Naruto coming out of shower, and she had been able to put the book back without being caught. Only now Rei was starting to wish that Naruto had caught her. thanks to her recently acquired knowledge about Naruto's bloodline, Rei had been unintentionally creating a wall between her and Naruto. She didn't mean to create the wall between them, and she certainly didn't want it to exist. However, the knowledge and the guilt that Rei felt over gaining that information was causing her to create the wall. This recent barrier between Rei and Naruto hadn't been noticed by any of their friends or families. They still kissed and they still held each other's hands like only two people in love could. It was just that there was this underlying tension that seemed to have developed between them. What made the whole thing worse for Rei was that Naruto seemed to barely notice the tension while she was constantly suffocating in it. In an ironic way, it was fitting that she was suffering due to something she had caused because of her curiosity. Forcing her thoughts back to the matter at hand, Rei returned to working on her seals. She continued to work on the seals for the next hour, and she finally stopped when she heard the boys sheath their blades. Rei then looked up and noticed that Naruto and Iori were dusting themselves off. Iori then started talking loud enough that Rei could listen in on the conversation. "Good spar, Naruto. I'd like to continue, but I promised the twerps that I'll help them out on their swordsmanship." Without saying anything more, Iori then left Naruto and Rei alone in the field. As Rei looked on, Naruto calmly started to collect his gear, and she made a sudden decision. The barrier that she had been creating between herself and Naruto needed to be taken down. In order to do that, Rei would have to get the guilt off of her chest and confess what she had done to Naruto. There was a good chance that Naruto might become upset at her for reading his clan codex, but at least it would be out in the air. Hopefully they would be able to quickly repair the damage that her curiosity had caused. Rei got up off of the ground, quickly straightened out the wrinkles in her dress, and walked over to Naruto. When Rei got within arm's length of Naruto, she nervously and rather meekly said, Naruto, can we talk?" Naruto stopped in the middle of putting his jacket back on and turned to face Rei. Now that Naruto was looking at her, Rei felt even more nervous than she had been. Nevertheless, she managed to say, "The other day when I was at your apartment, I took a peek at your clan codex." Once Rei managed to say that, she hung her head in shame and embarrassment. Naruto didn't say anything, and the ever-increasing silence felt like a weight to Rei that was pressing down on her. Finally, when Rei thought she couldn't take it anymore, Naruto sighed and calmly said, "So you read my clan codex? I was wondering when you would confess that to me." Rei whipped her head up so fast to look at Naruto in surprise that she almost sprained her neck muscles. She then lost her normal calm manner and stuttered out in surprise, How did you know?" It just didn't make any sense to Rei. She had placed the codex back exactly where it was before she had started reading it. Also, she had been calmly sitting on the couch when Naruto walked into the room, so there couldn't have been any indication from her body that she just placed the book back. The only thing that Rei could think of at moment to explain who Naruto knew was that he had been observing her with his Rinnegan. But that didn't make any sense either. Naruto didn't use the Rinnegan except for training or when he actually needed it. As if sensing her confusion, Naruto said, "There was a strand of your hair in between the pages." It had been so simple that Rei almost couldn't believe it. Naruto had found out what she did because she didn't remember to keep her hair from falling on the pages. That was something that had been continuously pounded into each and every girl's head back at the academy. Even the most hardened fangirls had managed to gain a few simple skills in keeping their hair from falling like that. Just like the teachers had said would happen. A single hair had notified Naruto that she had been snooping. The shock that she had been caught because of something so elementary, coupled with Rei's feelings of guilt over reading the codex, caused her legs to wobble. Rei was just starting to fall on her face when Naruto ran over and pulled her into his arms. As Rei cried into Naruto's chest, she felt as if the barrier between her and Naruto was being broken. After a minute or so of crying, Rei said while still being embraced by Naruto, "Why? Why didn't you say anything earlier?" Naruto thought about what Rei asked him, and then he replied, "To be honest, Rei, I was extremely upset when I first saw that piece of hair. Ever since I got my clan's codex, it has been something very precious to me that I haven't let anyone read. I might have given a summary about a point here and there to Irika or Gramps, but I have never let anyone read it. When I first saw that hair on the page, I actually felt betrayed. However, I quickly realized that I was being foolish by feeling betrayed. I had, after all, left the codex out where anyone could read it. Also, I had never asked you or anyone else to not read the codex, so you couldn't have betrayed my trust. Finally, I remembered how curious you were, my dear, and something like the Uzumaki clan codex was bound to have grabbed your attention. Once I had realized that, I decided to wait and see what you would do. It hurt me every time I saw the guilt and pain in your eyes, but I thought that confronting you might hurt you more than allowing you to come to me. Rei slowly looked up at Naruto, and although her face was in its usual elegant and calm expression, her eyes were full of expression. In Rei's eyes, Naruto could see her guilt over what she had done, her understanding of what he had done, and most importantly to Naruto, her love for him. She then softly said while looking into Naruto's eyes, "You were right, Naruto. It is better for me that I came to you instead of you coming to me." There was a brief moment of silence before Rei calmly added, "Just so you know, I never told anyone about what I read." That news brought a small smile to Naruto's face. He had never expected Rei to say anything about what she read to anyone, but having the belief confirmed felt good. Naruto pulled away from Rei a bit so that they could look at each other, and then he said in a more cheerful manner, "So what did you find out, Rei?" Rei calmly looked at Naruto and then said, "I only read the section on the Rinnegan." There was a comfortable silence between the young couple after Rei said that. This silence ended when Rei said, "I need to go now, Naruto. I promised Katsudo that I would help him close up the shrine for the night." She then leaned over, gently kissed Naruto, and then whispered into his ear, "Perhaps one day in the future when both of us are more mature and ready, I'll help you gain those 3 bloodline jutsus of yours." With that said, Rei gently pulled back from Naruto, gave him a small smile, and then she walked away, leaving a bewildered Naruto alone in the field. Iori was sitting on a tree branch and he leaning against the trunk of the tree. He would occasionally glance up at the sky and watch the pre-dawn light grow brighter. Almost 2 weeks ago, Team Chusa had been given their first independent mission: patrol a 10-kilometer stretch of the Fire Country/Rice Field Country border. Due to slight chance of encountering sound ninjas, this stretch of the Fire Country border was rated Chunin and above only for mission assignments. Glancing downwards, Iori looked at the well-hidden tent that Naruto and Rei were currently sleeping in. A small smile crossed Iori's face as he looked at where his best friends were currently resting. His teammates were the only friends that Iori had, and he would never let them fall to harm if he could prevent it. Of course, he'd also probably deny that he would do so if anyone asked him. It was just how he was, and everyone that really mattered to him knew that. Suddenly and unexpectedly, an image of that Suna ninja Temari entered Iori's mind, which he quickly shook away. That sand chick had kept popping up at odd times in Iori's thoughts as of late. Iori had no idea why her image kept popping up, and he hadn't told anyone about it either. Since it hadn't affected his abilities while on duty, it wasn't something that needed to be brought up, and it probably wasn't really important anyway, right? All of Iori's thoughts on the matter of Temari's image were immediately shelved for later when he heard the sound of a raven's cawing break the silence around him. Quickly turning his head, Iori spotted the raven that had been cawing, and he noticed that it was flying at the direction from Konoha. As the raven flew closer, Iori noticed that it was carrying a scroll in its feet. The raven landed on the tree branch next to Iori, and then said, "Urgent message from Konoha." Before Iori could say anything to the summoned creature, the raven vanished into a puff of smoke. Almost instantly after that, Iori grabbed the scroll that had just been delivered, and his eyes widened slightly when he saw that the Hokage's official seal unimprinted on the wax. This was undeniable proof, although the summoned ravens could be considered proof since on the Higurashi family had that contract, that the scroll was authentic. Iori then broke the seal on the scroll and quickly read the message. When Iori was finished reading the message, he roughly rolled the scroll back up and hopped down from the tree. As he walked over to the tent, he muttered to himself, "Great, just great. The whole continent's gone to hell." Iori then flipped over the tent flap and gave his teammates one quick glance. They were calmly sleeping together, with Rei laying her head on Naruto's chest as a pillow. Even though he would have preferred to not disrupt his friend's peaceful sleep, Iori called out loud enough to wake the two. "All right, newlyweds, the honeymoon is over." Thanks to their training, Naruto and Rei were able to instantly wake up, and they quickly got on their feet. Naruto looked at the mini clock in the tent and then said to Iori, "Why did you call us? Has a team of foreign ninjas been spotted?" Iori looked at his teammates, shook his head. "No, Naruto," Iori said in a gruff and grave voice. "The area is still clear, although I sure wish it was. Dealing with a couple regular border patrol ninjas would be a whole lot more preferable to the mess that's developed." Naruto and Rei then quickly glanced at each other and seemed to silently ask the other what could be going on. Before either of his teammates could ask what was going on, Iori decided to clarify what he meant. "Just minutes ago, I received an official message from Konoha via Raven Summon. 2 days ago, there was an attempt on the Wind Daimyo's life by Crevice ninjas from Stone Country. The Wind Daimyo survived the attempt on his life and immediately declared war on Stone Country. At the urging of the Tsuchikage, Earth Country and IWA has declared war on Wind Country. Bird Country, Grass Country, Waterfall Country, and their Shinobi villages have declared war as well. Last night, the Hokage informed Konoha that the village will be entering the war along with Fire Country to help out Wind Country. Due to existing treaties, River Country is also joining the war on as our ally. Rain Country is currently neutral, but they have cut off all diplomatic relations with Wind Country and Fire Country. The Fourth Great Ninja War has begun. Pain, heir to the Rinnegan and current ruler of AIM along with being the public leader of Akatsuki, was sitting troubled in his office. He was currently trying to figure out how this unexpected war could have suddenly broken out. Even more importantly, Pain was wondering how this war would affect Akatsuki's plans. One of the key points of Akatsuki's plan to take over the world required that Akatsuki corner the Shinobi market. In order to do that, Akatsuki would need the various hidden villages to be pushed into economic collapse. However, due to the new war, forcing the various hidden villages into economic collapse would be impossible. Mission demands from various clients were at an all-time high, now bringing in much-needed cash to the poorer villages and enriching the coffers of the larger, more stable villages. Pain went through the calculations in his head, and he didn't like what he saw. For every week of war, there would have to be an additional 3 weeks of peace to return the hidden villages back to the needed financial status. And that was just for the first year of war. After the first year, the time needed grew exponentially. In a fit of rage, Pain overturned his desk and hollered in rage. How dare these impudent mortals mess with his plans? He was God. This war completely ruined his and Madara's plans for the world. The 5 still free bijou had by now vanished to wherever the demons went to when the mortal world was at war. Even if the war was settled this very day, it could be years before even one of the bijou returned to the mortal world. A lifetime of careful planning was gone in an instant. After taking a moment to calm himself down, Pain marched out of his office. In a cold and aloft manner, Pain walked down the halls and headed towards Madara's private quarters. If anyone could figure out what Akatsuki should do about this situation, it would be Madara. In Konoha's council chambers, the entire High Council was patiently sitting in their seats. All of them had received a summons from Sarutobi to attend a special emergency session that he had called. Everyone wanted to know why Sarutobi had called them, and many figured that whatever the reason, it must have something to do with the new war that had broke out a few days ago. Finally, everyone heard the sound of a door open, and they turned to see Sarutobi walk in with Jiraiya walking close behind the old Hokage. In a regal manner, Sarutobi calmly and silently ascended to the raised Hokage seat in the council chamber. He then looked around the room as if he was checking to make sure that every member of the council was there. After that, Sarutobi calmly said, "As you all know, Konoha is now at war. I was able to lead us through the Third Great Ninja War, but in my advancing age, I fear that I will not have the strength to lead us through this new war. In order to ensure that Konoha has the best leadership it can have, I am using my emergency war powers to proclaim Jiraiya as the Godame. As of this moment, we follow his leadership." The council chamber was filled with the sound of almost all of the council members politely clapping their hands. No one roared in approval at the ascension of the Jiraiya due to the weight of the war on the council members' minds and the fact that everyone felt that doing so would be a slightly to Sarutobi. Even Sarutobi's political rivals and enemies on the council respected the old leader, and they wanted to show him their grudging respect. Once Jiraiya had calmly taken his seat as the newly proclaimed Hokage from Sarutobi, Jiraiya calmly said, "I'm sure that every kunoichi is afraid at the moment that I'll issue some perverted edict." This earned Jiraiya chuckles from the guys and a few death glares from the female council members. Jiraiya then held his hands in a placating manner and continued on. "Okay, let's get down to business. I won't give you people any false promises. This will be a long and bloody war. Anybody who claims that we can swiftly and decisively end this war is a fool who obviously was sleeping during history class. Yes, we can win this war, but we will need to cautious at first and remember the first principle of war. War is won by making the other poor dumb bastard die for his country." Many of the council members had grown up during the Third Great Ninja War or had participated in that war. They knew exactly where Jiraiya was coming from and knew the truth in his words. A few of less qualified council members didn't like the idea that there wouldn't be any grand campaigns, but they had the common sense to keep their mouths shut for the moment. Jiraiya then said in a very serious tone, "For my first official edict as Hokage, I am declaring that the cage bird seal on all members of the Hyuga family is to be removed and the seal permanently banned." Instantly, the council chamber became filled with noise as council members talked among themselves about the new edict. Never before had any Hokage dared to make an edict that interfered with how a ninja clan operated. Such a thing just wasn't done. Hayashi Hyuga quickly rose from his seat and called out, This is an outrage. No one has the right to dictate to a clan what a clan does. Jiraiya looked Hayashi in the eye and then he eyed the two branch members standing behind Hayashi. In his mind Jiraiya stated how sorry he was for what he was about to do, but out loud he answered, "This gives me the right, Hayashi Hyuga." With that Jiraiya created a single hand sign and activated the two branch members' seals. Hayashi looked on in horror as an outsider activated the seal and watched helpless as his two guards started to writhe in pain. Figuring that he had demonstrated his use of the seal enough, Jiraiya released the hand sign and then addressed the whole council chamber. Any person with a basic understanding of seals can figure out how to activate the cage bird seal. Besides myself, there are at least 50 other individuals in Konoha alone who could easily figure out that seal. Our enemies have hundreds of people who could figure that out. That means that over 200 of our Chunin and Jonin can be killed by our enemies with just a quick hand sign. In a much graver voice, Jiraiya then continued to address a shocked Hayashi. Don't think for a moment that our enemies won't activate the seal. Your bloodline means nothing to IWA or their allies. As far as they are concerned, the Hyuga is just another enemy clan to be eradicated. If a single caged bird seal remains in place on a branch member after 48 hours and that branch member was not on duty out of the village Hayashi, you and your entire Hyuga council will be executed for the crime of adding the enemy by deliberately weakening of Konoha's forces. This news further shocked all of the council members. Sarutobi's old teammate Koharu Udatane said in a shocked manner, "You would execute the entire ruling body of a clan Hokage?" Jiraiya glared at Koharu and said in a slightly frosty voice, "Let's see here. On the one hand, I have the lives of 6 has-beens who never distinguished themselves on the field and 1 Jonin who hasn't taken a mission in almost 17 years. On the other hand, I have the lives of over 200 active ninjas who would be killed due to the previously mentioned 7 people's wishes. In your own words, ex-advisor, it's simple numbers." At moment, everyone knew that Konoha had a strong Hokage once again who wouldn't any bullshit that the council might try to send his way. It was Team Chuza's last day on patrol and all 3 of them were happy that their mission was almost over. Of course, Naruto, Rei, and Iori all kept their pleasure at their tour ending apparently without incident to themselves. Until they were relieved of duty by their replacements and back in Konoha or another suitably defended town, they were still in a potential battlefield. Currently, Iori was cleaning some fish that Naruto had caught earlier. Naruto was sitting by unlit fireplace using his Rinnegan to scan the immediate area around the campsite. Finally, Rei was currently looking at the sky to check on her summons that she was using to extend the team's area of observation. Rei's eyes narrowed a bit as she noticed the summon that she knew was supposed to be watching things a few miles over the border in Whirlpool Country come flying in very fast. The summon flew into the camp and shouted, "Odo ninjas heading this way on what appears to be an attack run." Once the Raven summon landed, it said, "There are about 30 Odo ninjas heading this way at battle speed. They will be across the border in 20 minutes. It then disappeared in a cloud of smoke. Naruto then said with his eyelids narrowed, "This isn't good at all. Those Odo ninjas are almost certainly going on a raiding run. However, since Whirlpool Country and thus by extension Odo is technically neutral, we're a little short of options. If we attempt to use a preemptive strike against the group, they can claim that they were just doing training runs and were savagely attacked without provocation. Such a claim will do far more damage to Konoha than a simple raid could hope to do." Immediately Rei replied, "That must be what Odo is hoping to accomplish. They must have a secret treaty with IWA like the traitorous Waterfall Country had. We defend ourselves from the Odo ninjas. They claim they were attacked without provocation. Whirlpool Country joins the Circle Alliance, and at the same time the Double Alliance gets a bad rep. Unless," Iori said while raising his left hand and extending his pointer finger upwards, "we give undeniable proof that we are just defending ourselves." On seeing the intrigued looks on his teammates' faces, Iori continued, "What if we wait for those ninjas to cross the river? Then they're on Fire Country territory, and since Fire Country has tightened its borders, those Odo ninjas would technically be invading at that time." Naruto then jumped in and said, "I see where you're going with this, Iori." Then Naruto's eyes got a slightly mischievous tone to them as he said, "Hey Iori, how do you feel about whipping us up some Odo barbecue if I get you some premium toad oil? We've already got the grill set up by the riverside." Very quickly Iori caught on to what Naruto was saying, as he remembered that Team Chuza had uncovered several sets small shallow trenches crisscrossing the easiest crossing points along the river on the Fire Countryside. Those trenches were old and in poor maintenance, but those trenches were still usable. Iori had a smirk on his face as he said, "I hope you all like your barbecue extra crispy." Now with a plan of action, Team Chuza headed off to get everything ready. Rei was standing in one of the large trees overlooking the river, and she was observing Naruto and Iori preparing the oil trap. Stationed at equal points in the trap grid were 4 horse-sized toads that were quickly supplying the necessary oil. Resting up in the tree next to Rei was Hugen. The elder son of Wudenaz had been summoned because Rei planned to use him to provide air support. Just as Naruto's toads finished filling up the trenches, Hugen said, "Tell the boys to hide Rei. The enemy is almost here." Putting her trust in Hugen's superior senses, Rei called out, "Hide, guys! They're almost here." Iori quickly hid himself in a set of bushes that were next to a lighting point for the oil trap. On the other hand, Naruto dove into the river and quickly swam so that he was hiding behind a rock. Once everyone was in their proper hiding spots, no sign could be seen that anyone had been in the area recently. Hugen's word was quickly verified when the platoon of Oto ninjas appeared on the rice field side of the river. Those ninjas charged on the river without slowing down at all, proving that they were going to invade Fire Country. Inside his hiding place, Iori was watching the approaching enemy ninjas very carefully. He knew that right now the success of the plan, and possibly his team's life, was resting squarely on his shoulders. If he set the trap off too soon or too late, enough of the Oto ninjas could escape the attack to overwhelm Team Chusa. Fighting at 10-to-1 odds against them was not something any of the members of the team were comfortable with at their current skill level, especially if the enemy was just as skilled as they were. As soon as the last Oto ninja stepped onto the Fire Countryside of the river bank, Iori ignited the trap. Several of the Oto ninjas let out shrieks of surprise as they saw the walls of fire approach them. Many of the ninjas made the release hand sign, believing that what they were seeing was an advanced genjutsu. This was not surprising because Iori was able to make the flames larger and spread quicker than normal thanks to his bloodline. When the fire hit them, the Oto ninjas let out a blood-curdling and agonizing scream of pain. Some of the ninjas tried to make it back to the river, while others tried to escape the flames by heading further inland and out of the fire trap. The bulk of the Oto task force, however, remained inside the trap screaming until they died from burns and the smoke. That agonizing screaming was burned into Naruto, Rei, and Iori's minds. Even with their training, it was extremely hard to not break out into tears at the sound. Fortunately for Team Chusa, they were able to keep their wits about them and complete their assigned tasks. While Iori continued to keep the fire trap burning, Naruto and Rei were taking care of those who had escaped the attack. Naruto quickly swam among the ninjas who had dived into the river to try and douse the flames. He didn't allow any of the Oto ninjas to gather their wits as he killed them. At the same time, Rei, who was flying on Hugen's back, was using Spirit Release. Spirit Spear to slay those ninjas that had tried to make it further inland. Thanks to surprise, good planning, and good teamwork, all 30 of the Oto ninjas were killed without any harm to the members of Team Chusa. Slowly, wearily, 3 teammates regrouped together with the still burning fire in the background. They looked each other in the eyes, and then they slowly made their way back to their camp. Each of them knew that protocol stated that they secure the battle site and collect as much information as possible, but they really couldn't care at the moment. They too emotionally drained at the moment, and their replacements were scheduled to show up in a few hours. The information could be collected when the other team arrived. Jiraiya was in Konoha's war room, standing next to a very large table map of the elemental countries. All across the map were various small blocks that represented the various military forces in the war. A small sign escaped Jiraiya's lips as he looked at the map, and he remembered back to the Third Ninja War when this room was last used. He had hated that war, and he hated the war that was going on right now. Because of some 2-bit moron with delusions of grandeur, many good men and women were going to die, and Jiraiya knew he couldn't prevent that. Returning his focus to the present, Jiraiya focused his attention on the fire/rice field border. Rice Field Country's entry into the war on the Circle Alliance's side opened up another front that he had to worry about. True, Rice Field Country didn't have a large military force or a very large ninja village. However, protecting that front would divert necessary men and supplies away from the main lines. Luckily, Team Chusa's report on their confrontation with the Oto ninjas suggested a useful measure to secure that front with only about 70 of the ninja force typically needed for that area. Jiraiya was a little disappointed that he couldn't use the same tactics on the main front to create a wall of fire to protect Fire Country. Sadly, the Fire Daimyo would never accept the loss of so much useful land to go to defense. Even getting permission to use fire traps all along the fire/rice field border would be a tough sell. Also, Jiraiya knew that turning the entire main front into a wall of fire and keeping the fires burning required far more oil than all of the toad summons could hope to produce. It was just another idea that looks great on paper, but is totally impractical in real life. Turning his attention over to a series of clipboards, Jiraiya read the latest information on team statuses and projected arrival times. After reading several pages of information, Jiraiya stopped reading and considered something. He then headed over to the intercom and said, "Secretary, send out a memo to the gate guards. Tell them to inform Naruto that I want to see him in my office when he arrives in Konoha so I can give him something of his father's." Once the secretary had responded, Jiraiya ended the transmission and returned to reading the transcripts in front of him. Even as he focused on the transcripts, Jiraiya said, "Hope Naruto can figure out the Flying Thunder God Jutsu when I give him that scroll of Minato's. I'd like to help Naruto learn that jutsu, but I can't take any time away from managing the war along with my other duties as Hokage to help him. Even with the boost that the Flying Thunder God Jutsu will bring, it's just not worth the cost to my time right now. Maybe once things have settled down a bit, I can help him." Konohamaru was busy punching his assigned post of wood with the rest of his classmates lined up to his left and right. Unlike many in his class, Konohamaru and his two close friends weren't complaining about this new addition to the Ninja Academy's gym class. This new gym course was only one of many changes that Konohamaru, Udon, Miyogi, and the rest of the kids at the academy had witnessed since the start of the war. Several parents had complained about these new changes, stating that the changes made the academy far too hazardous for the safety of such young children. These people had wanted the academy to return to the way it was before the war. Jiraiya had sent out a notice in response which stated that some changes would stop as soon as the war was over. However, most of the changes would be staying in place even after the war because the academy needed those overhauls. A few parents had withdrawn their children from the ninja program in response, but most of the kids continued to attend. Unfortunately for Konohamaru, he lost count of how many punches he had done because the instructor called out, "Keep at it, youthful students. I know that you can all do 100 punches with both arms, or I will run around Konoha 50 times backwards." Konohamaru quickly turned around, made a face at Rock Lee while the teen was looking the other way, and then returned his attention to the wooden post. Sarutobi's grandson could handle with the harsher training of the academy and thrive on it, but he could not stand Special Chunin Rock Lee and his endless spouting about youth. Special Chunin was a brand new rank devised by Jiraiya that was basically the genin equivalent of Special Jonin. The rank was created so that Konoha would have a pool of genin that fulfill many of the in-village responsibilities that many of the Chunins did. This freed up many experienced ninjas so they could go to the front lines. No one was really sure if the Special Chunin rank would become permanent or if it would fade away as the war went on. However, Konoha's ninja force had accepted the Special Chunins for now and was willing to try the idea. Drowning out Lee's voice, Konohamaru returned his attention to the post in front of him. Both Grandpa and Uncle Asuma had told Konohamaru that they expected the war to be long and bloody. Now Konohamaru didn't fully understand, and he knew he didn't understand the pain and sadness that those two had when they talked about how the war would turn out. Konohamaru knew that the war would be painful and cause many people a lot of grief. He just didn't have the first-hand experience on the front lines to understand how terrible it could and would be. Nevertheless, Konohamaru was determined to do his best in the academy so he could get out to the front. After all, he and his friends would be the ones to turn the tide and crush the Circle Alliance. Iori walked into his family's bakery and proceeded to sit down at one of the few tables that they provided for customers who wanted to eat at the bakery. Normally Iori would head in through the door by the bakery's oven, but not today. Right now Iori wanted to stay as far away from an open flame as he could get in his family's house/store. Normally Iori loved fire and the warmth that it brought like all members of the Kusanagi family did. However, right now fire just reminded him of the ambush that Team Chusa had set. Thanks to the adrenaline of the battle and the potential danger that the team was in on the way to Konoha, Iori had been able to keep the memories of the battle at bay. But now that he was safe within Konoha, those memories had come flooding back to him. Even looking at a lit candle brought those memories to Iori's mind. He could hear the Oto ninjas' screams of agony, see their burning bodies as they turned to blackened husks, and he could remember the smell of burning human flesh. It wasn't like the battle in the stadium at all. Back then Iori had known that he was in danger and could have lost his life. He had even seen people die in the stadium due to Shikaku's attacks. However, that battle seemed to have a sort of larger-than-life thing or something that seemed to separate the brutality from him. The ambush, on the other hand, was up close and personal, hitting Iori with the full force of its brutality. He had been the one to light the trap. He was the one who had mercilessly burned his enemies to death. Naruto and Rei killed their targets cleanly and mercifully while he had caused his enemies an incredible amount of agony before they died. At the same time as Iori was brooding, his father Kenma was walking down the street past the bakery. Kenma spotted Iori from the bakery's window, and he immediately went in to talk to his son. Once he was inside, Kenma headed over to the table Iori was sitting at, and he sat down across from the boy. The two just sat together in silence for a few minutes before Kenma said, "This isn't the first time you've taken a human life before, Iori." Iori glared at his father, who was sitting impassively across from him. He then slammed his hands on the table and said as he rose out of his seat angrily, "This isn't the first time you've taken a human life. Is that the best you can do for comfort, father? I watched as I burned those men alive. I saw the utter agony and despair in their eyes as they died. Don't you dare compare their deaths to the deaths of those guards I killed on my first C-rank mission. Have you ever witnessed a man burned alive and knew that it was because of you that the person died in such a horrible manner?" Kenma then shot Iori a glare of his own and calmly said, "As a matter of fact, son, I have, and on 7 separate occasions I might add." After letting out a sigh, Kenma continued, "Look, Iori, there is something important that you're just realizing. Yes, we as ninjas will have to take the lives of our fellow men, and I know that you have realized that. However, you won't always be able to deal your enemy a mercifully swift death. There will be times where you'll leave an enemy to die a slow and agonizing death, because if you took that extra second to end their suffering, one of your comrades could be wounded or killed." Tears were starting to form in Iori's eyes as he looked at his father. Dropping his usual tough guy attitude, Iori practically sobbed out, "How do you do it, Dad? How are you able to look at a fire or use our bloodline without feeling revulsion at what you've done and what you can do?" Kenma leaned across the table and firmly grabbed Iori's shoulder in such a way that only a father could do, so that Iori was able to draw Kenma's strength. While still holding Iori's shoulder firmly in his hand, Kenma said, "As ninja, our bloodline is a tool. You didn't throw away your sword after you used it to slit those guards' throats. In time, the pain will become easier for you to bear, but it will never go away. Just remember, Iori, why we fight. To protect our family and our home." Iori then said as he whipped away a tear that was starting to form, "Thanks, Dad, I needed that." Kenma then got up and left Iori alone so he think about what the two of them had said. Just before Kenma left the room, he turned around and smiled at Iori. The boy was growing into a man that Kenma was proud of and that he would continue to proud of. Naruto sat at his cleared-off kitchen table and was busily studying the scroll that Jiraiya had made him get from behind his father's picture in the Hokage's office. For the past few hours, Naruto had been relentlessly studying his father's notes, instructions, and illustrations for the Flying Thunder God Jutsu. However, even though Naruto got the basic concept behind the jutsu, he was stumped at how to actually learn the jutsu. Flying Thunder God was classified in Minato's notes as a ninjutsu and fuinjutsu hybrid. The seal portion of the jutsu was special seals on the kunai used in the jutsu that had a small sample of the user's chakra preserved within it. Also, the seals on the kunai caused a ping that the user could sense when thrown, and that ping was used as the targeting agent of the Flying Thunder God. Ninjutsu entered the equation with the fact that the Flying Thunder God required the user to perform a difficult form of chakra manipulation so that the user's chakra wrapped around the sample in the seals. This wrapping around the chakra sample was what allowed the user to transport from one location to the next. Naturally, the whole process was a lot more complicated when it came to exactly how the wrapping of the user's chakra caused the transportation. There were several theories behind the move that explain why this happened, but those theories were way over Naruto's head. Luckily for Naruto, a person didn't have to understand the theory behind the Flying Thunder God in order to use it. The problem that Naruto had in trying to learn the jutsu was the fact that he needed the seal portion of the Flying Thunder God in order to learn it. Naruto could work on several of the steps needed for the jutsu without the seals, but he wouldn't be able to progress past a certain point without the seals. Also, Naruto couldn't use his father's kunai even if he had them, because the jutsu required that it be a sample of his chakra that was in the seal. Unfortunately, Naruto was not nearly skilled enough to create the needed seals, and it would take him years to gain the skill. Not wanting to admit defeat, Naruto reread the section on seal part of the jutsu. After carefully reading the part about the seal's creation, Naruto started to smile. Even though the seal required a seal master to create it, the seal could be created by a seal master for someone else. Minato had obviously realized that not everyone in his family would be seal masters and had left instructions for how to adapt the seal so that someone else's chakra besides the maker of the seal could be used as the sample. Luckily, Naruto just happened to know of a great seal mistress who he was sure could create the seal for him. Rei was aimlessly walking down Konoha streets, and she had been walking since before the sun set. After giving her part of the report to the person at the mission desk, Rei had gone home. However, after spending about an hour at home, Rei had felt the need to go for a walk. As she walked up and down Konoha Street, Rei just took in the feel of the village. The atmosphere in the village felt charged, like the whole village was ready to fight. This excitement for the war just seemed ridiculous to Rei. Didn't the fools raring for the war realize how horrible it was? However, it seemed that most of the civilians, genin, and a good portion of the chunin had their heads filled with ideas of battle glory. On the other hand, almost all of the jonin and a good deal of the older civilians had just accepted the war and seemed to know what was going to happen. These people had lived through the Third Ninja War and they knew what to expect out of this war. Now, of course, there were exceptions on both sides. For instance, Ino, who Rei had beaten in the preliminaries, was not filled with delusions of glory. When Rei had passed by the Yamanaka flower shop, she remembered the blonde having a heated argument with a pink-haired girl that Rei knew had been a fangirl. It had been immediately obvious to Rei that the pink-haired girl was still a fangirl and an idiot when she overheard the pink-haired girl and Ino argue. Ino had been trying to get the fangirl to realize that the war was not a good thing and that her Sasuke wasn't going to become some amazing war hero. If the Sasuke that the fangirl had been talking about was Sasuke Uchiha, then Rei suspected that the boy would end up a war hero posthumously. Returning her focus to the present, Rei looked around to see where her feet had carried her. She very quickly realized that she was about 10 feet away from Naruto's apartment. Very quickly, Rei decided to go drop in on Naruto. His presence was just more comforting and relaxing to Rei than her brother's or her grandfather's. Right now, Rei needed that comfort and care that Naruto had for her, and she knew it. When she reached Naruto's door, she was about to knock, but then she hesitated when she saw the Feng Shui fusion seal on the back of her hand. Rei immediately remembered how during the battle with Shikaka, Naruto had sent her a message via their connection from the ritual. That fact hadn't really come up until just now, and it gave Rei an idea. Instead of knocking on the door, Rei calmly sent a series of small amounts of chakra into the seal. The message she sent via Konoha's battle code was simple. "I am here, love. Let me in the door." Once the message was sent, Rei just stood and waited to see if Naruto would respond. Less than a minute after Rei sent the message, Naruto opened the door and let her in. Once Rei was inside and Naruto had closed the door, she gave Naruto a hug. It wasn't a clingy hug, but rather it was a gentle hug that let Naruto know that she needed him. The two of them just stood where they were embracing each other for a few minutes in comfortable silence. Rei then broke the silence when she said, "Can I stay here, Naruto? Just for the night?" This question surprised Naruto, and he said while still holding Rei, "Why would you want to, Rei? I mean, you've got your bed in your room at your home to go sleep in. Your brother and grandfather are probably waiting at your home for you. Why do you want to stay here?" Rei then looked up into Naruto's eyes and said, "Because you're here. I want to sleep next to you, Naruto. I don't want to be alone right now. Please let me stay here, just for tonight. We've slept next to each other countless times while out in the field, so why should it be any different right now?" At the moment, Naruto wanted to point out just how different the idea of having their sleeping bags close together versus sharing a bed really was. However, he never voiced any of those reasons when he looked into Rei's beautiful emerald eyes. Right now, Rei needed to be with him, and Naruto knew it. Was complaining about her staying the night really worth it, considering the fact that Rei's staying over would help her out? Besides, a traitorous part of Naruto's mind pointed out, why was he refusing to spend time with his wonderful girlfriend? Also, it wasn't like he was some hormonally driven jerk who would try and take advantage of Rei and her current vulnerability. Finally making his decision, Naruto said, "All right, Rei, you can stay here for the night, but only for tonight. Promise me that tomorrow you'll go and sleep at your own home. I don't need Katsudo or your grandfather coming after me because you decide to stay with me." On seeing the small smile that this last comment brought to Rei's face, Naruto said, "Now then, Rei, have you had dinner, or should I fix you something to eat?" In her usual composed way, which let Naruto know that she was feeling better, Rei said, "No thanks, Naruto. I stopped and had dinner at the Korean barbecue restaurant about 40 minutes ago. Still, thanks for offering, Naruto." The two of them then spent the next hour talking about everyday nonsense, deliberately staying away from all references to their jobs as ninja. After the hour of talking was over, the two of them decided it was time for bed. Naruto attempted at the time to get Rei to take his bed while he slept on the couch. However, Rei put her foot down on that by saying, "Naruto, if you sleep on the couch, then I'm going to join you there. I want sleep next to you, not in the same building as you." Since the idea of Rei sleeping on him to sleep on the couch, which she would have had to do, made Naruto too nervous, he quickly agreed to join Rei in his bed. Once Naruto had settled into bed, Rei came into his room and closed the door. She then unbuttoned her dress and, while in Naruto's view, let it fall to the floor. Clad only in her underwear, Rei turned off the lights, walked over, and climbed into the bed. At the same time, Naruto stammered out, "Why are you sleeping in your underwear, Rei? I have several t-shirts that you could use." In reply, Rei calmly said as she pulled the covers up, "I've seen your t-shirts, Naruto. Yes, they fit me, but they aren't long enough to cover up all of my underwear. Thus it doesn't really pay to have me wear one of your shirts, right? Besides, I'm under the blankets and the lights are off, so it's not like you can see anything." Despite Naruto's danger sense going off at the idea of a half-naked Rei sleeping next to him, he had to admit that her logic was rather sound. Knowing that she had gotten Naruto to see things her way, Rei smiled in the darkness. She then rolled over and gently kissed Naruto's cheek. Before closing her eyes for the night, Rei said, "Naruto, don't panic in the morning if you wake up holding me or lying on me. I don't mind the idea of you using my breasts as pillows, and I'm expecting that we will probably start to hug each other in our sleep. Good night and sleep tight." Naruto stood by his kitchen stove as he carefully prepared breakfast for him and Rei. In the background, as Naruto was cooking, he could hear the sound of the shower running. A traitorous part of Naruto's mind brought up the idea of using his bloodline to check up on Rei. However, Naruto ruthlessly destroyed that particular thought and pulverized its ashes into oblivion. Not only was such an action unethical, but it would also destroy the trust that existed between the couple. Rei then walked into the room in her spare outfit with her hair wrapped up in a towel just as Naruto finished the final touches to breakfast. She then sat down at the table and Naruto delivered her breakfast before sitting down as well. The two of them quietly said thanks and then started to enjoy the meal. Once they had about halfway finished their meals, Rei said, "Thank you for letting me stay here, Naruto." Looking up from his plate, Naruto calmly said, "I don't mind, Rei." He then felt Rei send a small glare at him. It wasn't anything serious, but Naruto got the message. Looking Rei in the eyes, Naruto said, "I mean it, Rei, when I said that I don't mind. Yes, I was a little nervous last night, but that doesn't change the fact that I was and still am worried about you. A little nervousness on my part is a small price to pay in order to ensure that you're feeling better." This honest statement from Naruto caused Rei's cheeks to slightly blush. Naruto's simple sweet actions had once again demonstrated why Rei had fallen for him so hard. She knew that flattering words and witty declarations of love, despite what a lot of the girls her age still thought, didn't mean anything even though they were nice to hear once in a while. It was a person's actions that held a relationship together and proved someone's love. That was something that Naruto understood at an unconscious level at the very least very well. After they had eaten breakfast and while they were still at the table, Rei said, Naruto, if you don't mind my asking, what was it that you working on before I came over here last night? If it's anything I can help you on, I'll do whatever I can." With a chipper voice, Naruto stated, "Thanks for the offer, Rei. Actually, I was planning on asking you if you could help me with that today." Naruto then paused for a moment to remove the dishes. Then he pulled out a scroll, unrolled it in front of Rei, and then said, "This is what I was working on. It's scroll containing instructions to perform the Flying Thunder God Jutsu. Now I can learn how to do this with your help because I need a seal master or mistress to prepare part of the preparations for the jutsu. Go ahead, Rei, and look at the scroll. I don't mind." Always eager to study new seals, Rei practically pounced on the unrolled scroll and immediately started to read it. The more Rei read about the Flying Thunder God, the more she became astounded by Minato Namikaze's genius. More than once Rei had heard her grandfather mention that the late Yondaime was incredibly gifted in the sealing arts, but until now she had never had the chance to really see that genius. Yes, the original seal on Naruto's stomach was an impressive seal. However, it paled in comparison to the seals that the Higurashi family had created. After Rei had read through the scroll, she turned to Naruto and said, "I can see why you need my help, Naruto. The seals needed to perform the Flying Thunder God are incredibly complex. I can make them, but I would time to study them carefully before I could make them for you. Can I come over here so that I can study these seals more, Naruto?" To Rei's surprise, Naruto gave her a quick kiss on the lips, and then he said, "I'll make a copy of the scroll for you to have, Rei. This way you can study the seals when you're at home. Also, Rei, make a set of kunai for yourself as well once you can make a set for me." On seeing the look of absolute shock and surprise on Rei's face, Naruto just smiled and said, "I want you to have the jutsu, Rei. You're the only person alive I'm willing to trust the Flying Thunder God to." Even though Rei knew how much Naruto cared for her, She still couldn't believe that he had asked her to learn the Flying Thunder God Jutsu with him. Sure, she had expected him to ask her to make the seals for him once she found out about them, and she was more than willing to make them. However, asking her to make her own set of kunai was totally different. Among ninjas, offering to teach a high-ranking secret family jutsu to someone outside the family or rarely a student was a huge deal. What Naruto had just done could have been taken as him asking her to be his wife or at least his mistress. Looking into Naruto's blue eyes, Rei didn't see any sign that Naruto was offering the jutsu as part of a proposal. Of course Rei, if she was being perfectly honest with herself, wouldn't really have minded if Naruto was sending her a proposal. However, that was neither here nor there at the moment. Naruto was offering the jutsu solely because he cared for her and he trusted her with it. In Rei's mind, there was only one thing she could do with this offer. She gave Naruto one of her usual small smiles and then she said, "Okay Naruto, once I've created a set of kunai for you, I'll make a set for me." Iruka was walking through the Hokage Tower with a clipboard in his hand. As the second most senior instructor at the academy, Iruka had the job of updating Jiraiya about what was going on at the academy. Sarutobi, as the new principal of the Ninja Academy, had too much work to do managing the students and the new special Chunin instructors to deliver these reports. Iruka didn't mind delivering these weekly reports to Jiraiya since the Godame always wanted personal observations that none of the special Chunin were likely to pick up on yet. Besides, in Iruka's opinion, it just wouldn't be fair to ask Sarutobi to deliver these reports. The old leader should have been off enjoying his well-deserved retirement instead of giving up more of his time by being the principal. When Iruka got to the Hokage's office, he knocked on the door and waited for a response. Almost immediately, Iruka heard Jiraiya's voice telling him to come in. Iruka opened the door and saw Naruto, Rei, and Iori all standing in the room. The scarred Chunin then walked over to where Jiraiya was sitting and handed him the clipboard saying, "The weekly report, sir. Would you like me to leave until after you have finished your business with these three?" Jiraiya shook his head and said, "No Iruka, you can stay. With your experience you might be able to offer these three some advice for their next mission." Iruka quickly sat down while Jiraiya turned his attention over to the younger trio. "Your mission, you three, is a fairly simple mission. The Isuzu Bridge in Waterfall Country spans one of the larger rivers in that country. This bridge is the only bridge on the river south of Taki that the Circle Alliance controls. You're to go in and blow that bridge up. Sneaking into Waterfall Country will not be that hard, although is potentially dangerous, so be alert, because the Circle Alliance is currently focused on attacking us from Grass Country. Now, while your primary mission is to destroy that bridge, you are ordered to cause as much collateral damage among the civilian population of Waterfall Country as you can. I know causing needless civilian casualties is a dirty business. However, these orders come directly from the Fire Daimyo himself. It seems that he and the other daimyos want to destroy Waterfall for their treachery. Personally, I can understand where they're coming from even if the method is a little extreme." At that point Iruka spoke up. "Pardon me, Lord Jiraiya, but why are you sending these three on this mission? Protocol states that these kinds of missions should be done by a team of either 4 Jonin or 6 Chunin. I know for a fact that the Double Alliance isn't nearly pressed enough for manpower that we would need to cut down an attack force by half." Jiraiya let out a small laugh and he said, "Glad to see that some ninjas still don't just accept a mission at its face value." His face then became more serious and he said, "The answer is simple. Currently the Circle Alliance is working on the assumption that we're going to fight this war like we did the last ninja war. Thus the armies of the Circle Alliance are set up for big open battlefields and the ninja villages have their ninjas deployed to prevent important individuals from being assassinated. The Double Alliance, on the other hand, is using a completely new strategy that was created by the Yondaime after the Third Ninja War. This attack on the Isuzu Bridge is just one of dozens of precision strikes that are about to commence. Our enemies will soon find it hard to fight a war when their food supplies are destroyed, their factories can't produce any weapons or armor, and their troops are being picked off squad by squad. I know that these three can make it through large gaps in the enemy's defenses and complete this mission. Adding more ninjas would just increase the chance of discovery." Upon seeing that both the trio and Iruka didn't have anything more to say, Jiraiya said, "I'm glad that you all understand what's going on. Team Chuza, as of this moment you three are being reorganized. You three will all still be on the same team. However, Chuza will no longer be on your team as he is now part of the reformed Inoshikacho trio. From now on your team name is to be Team Seizen." Iori gruffly said, "Why are we going to be called Team 3x3 Hokage? No offense, but that doesn't seem like the usual naming convention for a ninja team." Jiraiya just smiled and replied, Actually, Kusanagi, the name fits your team. Your team is the only team on the books with 3 bloodline bearers and 3 different summoning contracts. Thus, your Team Seizen. All 3 members of the renamed Team Seizen looked at each other and slowly nodded their heads. They all had to agree that their new team name did suit them. It also was a better name than they were likely to come up with. And so, without anything further to contribute, Team Seizen headed out to complete their mission. Team Seizen stood in a patch of trees that overlooked the Isisu village along with the Isisu bridge. Just like Jiraiya had told them, it had been fairly easy to sneak into Waterfall Country. Of course, that was in part because Team Seizen was going after a target that the enemy thought had no strategic value. The trio, of course, weren't about to complain that their enemies thought they were about to attack some unimportant target. Any mission that could be completed without incident was a great mission. Currently, Rei and Iori were standing next to Naruto, carefully observing their surroundings for possible attacks. Naruto was using his Rinnegan to gather intel on both the bridge and any useful civilian targets. Their orders might have been to cause as much collateral damage among the civilian population as practical, but that was still open to interpretation. To Naruto and the rest of Team Seizen, civilian collateral damage meant blowing up bathhouses, sewage lines, and other things that improved morale. Not only would such an action demoralize the entire town, but it was also easier on the team's conscience than randomly blowing up houses. It was Waterfall's leaders that were the traitors and backstabbers, not the civilians. Once Naruto had collected the intel, he disengaged his Dojutsu and rolled his head. He then turned to his teammates and said, "Here's the situation. The town has 1 platoon infantryman. Judging by their poorly kept uniforms and sloppy maneuvering, they're probably from an auxiliary conscript unit that was given minimal training before being deployed so that the real soldiers could go to the front. Practically, the entire platoon is getting drunk at the town tavern while 4 members of the platoon are sleeping away at the bridge. There are no enemy ninjas in this village that I could spot." Iori then said, "It's to be expected that there wouldn't be any ninjas in this village. After all, it has nothing of value to cause the Double Alliance to attack it. Now the only question is who goes into town to blow stuff up while the other 2 rig the bridge to blow? Personally, I feel that you should do it, Naruto. After all, you know the town layout already, so you won't have to explain it to either of us. I'll set the charges under the main sections of the bridge, while Rei sets things off on the poles near the waterline." In her usual calm manner, Rei said, "Iori is right, Naruto. It makes sense for you to set the explosives in town. Once Iori and I have set the charges, I'll contact you and you can tell us when to blow the charges. We can then regroup in this grove before we head back to Konoha." Naruto nodded his head and then disappeared to go cause havoc in the village. Almost immediately, Iori and Rei headed off to the bridge. Iori was very curious as to how Rei and Naruto would be communicating, since they didn't have any radios. However, Iori held back from asking Rei about that because now wasn't the proper time to ask. Once they were all back in Konoha, Iori planned on asking the couple, but for now he figured he could trust them. It took Rei and Iori 10 minutes to get to the bridge by swimming in the river. They could have made it in 5 minutes, but they didn't want to sacrifice their stealth. When Iori reached the nearest wooden pylon of the bridge, he grabbed the pillar and pulled himself up. Like most members of his clan, Iori had built up an impressive amount of upper body strength for occasions like this. As long as he was only releasing his chakra on the pylon and not the surrounding water, then the water wouldn't be disturbed because of the Kusanagi bloodline. While Iori was scaling the pylon so he could set his assigned charges, Rei was working quickly on her charges. She was very calmly kneeling on the water and carefully wrapping her explosives around the pylons just above the water line. Once Rei had the explosive notes in the proper position, she proceeded to attach a series of special wires between the notes. These wires would ensure that all of the notes went off when one of the notes went off. It took Rei a few minutes to carefully set and double-check the wires. After Rei had finished that task, she looked up to check on Iori's progress. Rei could immediately tell that Iori hadn't finished his part of the job and that he seemed to be struggling. She cupped her hands around her mouth and then whispered, "Pish, Iori. What's the hold up on your end?" Iori twisted his head to face Rei and he said, "I've run into a snag. 2 of the wires in my explosive kit are split. The package they were in is brand new, so it must be a factory defect. I don't have enough wire to link all of the seals together. Right now, I only have enough for 3 of the 5 tags." Rei quickly started to think about what Iori had told her. Not having enough wire to ensure that all the tags would go off at the same time was a big problem. Unfortunately, Rei didn't have any extra wire on her to give to Iori. Luckily, however, this problem wouldn't affect the mission much in the end. Quickly coming to a decision, Ray whispered, "Just set and link the tags in the center of the bridge. Between your 3 charges and the charges I've set, the other 2 tags should be ignited in the explosion." Nodding his head, Iori quickly got to work. It took him about 7 minutes to rewire everything according to Ray's instructions. Once everything on his end was set, Iori carefully climbed down and slowly slipped into the water. Iori then turned to Ray and said, "Okay, Ray, tell Naruto that this bridge is ready to be blown." Ray closed her eyes and concentrated on the link between her and Naruto. A minute after she had sent her message, Naruto replied. Opening her eyes, Ray said, "Naruto understands. He says to blow the bridge in 5 minutes." Iori nodded his head, set the timer on the tags, and then he started to swim out to a safer distance. Ray was right there beside him in the river, swimming as well. Once both of them were a safe distance away from the bridge, Iori and Ray carefully waited for the 5 minutes to pass. When the 5 minutes had passed, Iori and Ray watched as the Isuzu bridge went up in flames. At the same time, the duo heard a series of explosions coming from the town. Knowing that staying around would just cause them more problems, Iori and Ray quickly swam to the meeting spot. It had been 2 days since the destruction of the Isuzu bridge, and Team Seizen was now only 7 miles from the border. Even though they were almost home free, the team hadn't relaxed their guard, since almost safe is not the same as being safe. Thanks to their state of alertness, Team Seizen detected the presence of other people close by. Immediately, all 3 members of Team Seizen stopped moving and quickly started to talk to each other in battle sign language. Very quickly, the team was decided to sneak up on the nearby people. If they were from Double Alliance Team Seizen, plane to help out, and if they were from the Circle Alliance Team Seizen, plane to try and kill them. Naruto quickly searched the area with the Rinnegan to find who the nearby people were and exactly where they were. A few moments later, Naruto disengaged the Rinnegan and said, "It's 4 Taki ninjas 100 feet from our current position, west-southwest. One of them has his face in the ID books. That person is Shibuki, son of Taki's leader. He's Chunin rank, and it seems that he's leading a team of genin. They must be on a training mission to teach the genin patrol tactics in a relatively safe area. Overall, the Taki ninjas are disorganized and poorly aware of their surroundings." Ray shook her head and said, "I don't like the idea of killing green genin. It's too much like killing civilians that aren't connected to a mission for my tastes. However, even though I'm going to hate myself once this is all over, it's better that we kill those kids now before they have a chance to grow." Both men turned to look at each other, and then they nodded their heads at the same time. Iori then turned to Ray and said, "We sneak in, and then I hit them with a high-power fire jutsu when they are huddled together. Or at least, I strike when all the genin are together, and then we deal with the instructor. That way, Ray, you don't have that on your conscience. Naruto, why don't you go after Shibuki? With your Rinnegan, you can travel underground and kill the target just after I strike." Shibuki looked at the team his father had entrusted to him and couldn't help but smile, even as he wanted to pull out his hair. Reika could be so sweet at times, it was almost hard to believe that she was the more infamous prank mistress in Taki. Ryoga could be such a bull-headed boy, and yet, it was so hilarious watching the boy become tongue-tied when Reika batted her eyes at him. Tenchi was such a kind boy who would one day become a famous medic ninja. Of that, Shibuki was sure of. The team was a relatively new team. It had been formed 2 months ago, and the genin were straight out of Taki's ninja school. Originally, there had been a jonin in charge of this team. However, Shibuki had been assigned to filling in the role of mentor for this team a month ago after the original leader was disabled in a special mission that the jonin had been called to do. At first, Shibuki had been a little unsure of himself when he took control of this team. Why wouldn't he after all? He was only a SOSO Chunin who had to fill in for a very well-loved and respected jonin. And at first, Shibuki's fears about his taking control, the team did prove correct, since the trio did not respond very well to him. However, as both he and his genin spent more time together, the friction between them disappeared. He had come to be surer of himself, and they had come to accept him as their leader. Currently, the 4 of them were on their first C-rank mission as a team patrolling the area. Shibuki turned his attention away from his team and looked around the area. This part of Waterfall Country was always his favorite place. Not even Taki held as much appeal to him as this quiet country area. Out here, the war seemed so far away, like it wasn't even going on. He liked it out here away from the war because the war seemed so pointless to him. Oh, Shibuki knew all about how the Circle Alliance would bring prosperity to Waterfall Country and thus to Taki. Or at least, Shibuki knew what his father had to say on the matter. Suddenly, Shibuki's danger sense flared up, and he yelled out to his students, Battle positions, everyone. He turned around to look at his students and suddenly he saw a huge fireball come flying at the genin. Time seemed to stop in a horrible standstill for Shibuki as he watched the fireball hit Reika and then explode. For an instant of time Shibuki could see the pain, horror, and panic on Reika's face in crystal clarity before the fireball exploded, completely consumed her. After the fireball enveloped Reika, it expanded at such speed and to such a size that Ryoga and Tenchi were caught in the explosion as well. Instantly Shibuki started to run towards the boys, hoping that he might be able to save them. As much as he didn't want to admit it, Reika was gone because her body had been burnt to a crisp. There was no way that she could be alive after that attack, and even if by some miracle she was still alive, there was nothing that he could do to save her life. Hopefully, Shibuki prayed, he would be able to save Ryoga and Tenchi's lives. When Shibuki was about 15 feet away from where the boys lay, he suddenly saw a person pop out of the ground. Shibuki tried to dodge the figure so that he could get into a better attack position. Unfortunately for Shibuki, his attacker seemed to have anticipated this and drove a kodachi straight into his heart. The last thing that Shibuki saw before death closed his eyes was his attacker's strange orange and purple eyes. Naruto was walking through one of the outer parks in Konoha trying to get the dying face of the ninja he had recently killed out of his mind. 3 days ago Naruto had made a mistake when he had slain that ninja. He should have killed the young man in the back or shifted his vision after he had driven Joshua into his opponent's heart. If he had done that, then he wouldn't be suffering from the image of the person's face as that person died. Why? Naruto wondered. Why was that person's face haunting him so? The boy wasn't his first kill, hell, the young man wasn't even one of the first dozen kills, so why was this person so different? Perhaps, Naruto thought, he was so bothered by that kill because his enemy seemed so similar to him. Or at least was similar to what Naruto had hoped to do in a few years. Almost every jonin in Konoha had trained, or at least had been assigned, a team of genin. At that moment Naruto wished that Rei was nearby so that he could bury his face in her hair while hugging her. However, Rei was currently at her house talking with her brother and grandfather. She might come over later tonight and Naruto was hoping that she would. But for now he was on his own. Naruto had never told anyone. But Rei had become the pillar that allowed him to anchor himself and remain calm. Sure, meditation helped him to stay calm at times. However, meditation did not help him nearly enough as her mere presence did. The quiet solitude of the park was suddenly broken by the sound of Konohamaru running through the park and shouting. There you are, Naruto. I've been looking all over for you. I heard that you just got back from a mission behind enemy lines. What did you do? Steal a set of the enemy plans? Take out an important enemy general? Whatever it was, I'm sure that those stupid Circle Alliance soldiers were no match for Dash. Konohamaru was stopped in mid-sentence by Naruto, who backhanded Konohamaru and sent the boy sprawling onto the ground. Naruto turned to face Konohamaru and said with tears running down his face as his whole body shook, "Do you think this is war, is a game, Konohamaru? Huh, do you? Open your eyes, boy, this isn't a game. The enemy soldiers aren't just impersonal drones, kid. They're people just like you and me. Every time I or any other soldier kills an enemy, we are killing someone's child, another person's sibling, and even more people's friend or love. They have hopes and dreams just as we do, Konohamaru. Hopes and dreams that will never come to pass because I or someone else has ended their lives. How would you feel if someone killed Miyogi, Udon, Grandpa Sarutobi, or me, Konohamaru? Every time a soldier on either side dies, someone out there is left with that feeling of loss. There is no glory in war, Konohamaru. No honor can be found on the battlefield. All you can do is to try to live and make sure that your friends live so that someone else feels that loss so that you don't have to feel it." In a shocked manner, Konohamaru slowly raised his hand and felt where Naruto had struck him on his cheek. However, the pain on his cheek paled in comparison to the pain that Naruto's words and the accompanying revelation brought with them. The little boy started to sniffle and then slowly started to cry. Between the sobs, Konohamaru said, "I'm sorry, Naruto. I just wanted to hear about your mission. Almost all of my friends have been going on about how cool their friends are and the W war stories they tell." Letting out a sigh, Naruto kneeled down and gently hugged Konohamaru. Then, in a concerned big brotherly tone, Naruto said, "I'm sorry as well, Konohamaru. I shouldn't have hit you, and I'm sorry about losing my temper and striking you. Can you forgive me?" Konohamaru nodded his head, and with how Naruto was hugging the boy, he felt instead of saw Konohamaru's reply. Naruto got up and then he picked Konohamaru up off the ground. Before Konohamaru could realize what was happening, he found himself up in the air, sitting on Naruto's shoulders. To Konohamaru's surprise, Naruto, then twisted his head so that Konohamaru could part ally see Naruto's face. Naruto then called up, "Hey Konohamaru, why don't we go and get some ramen? Personally, I think going and eating at Ichiraku's would be a lot better right now than hanging out here in the park." Agree. Konohamaru nodded his head and then started to smile, and he felt the wind whipping in his hair, and Naruto ran to their favorite restaurant. Katshudo sat by the front door facing the main steps from the street to the house in the morning light. The war had been going on for almost 3 months now, and Konoha was no longer filled with jubilation that the promises of an easy victory brought. Now the village was filled with a dreary acceptance of losses and quick-lived cheer of successful missions. However, that didn't really matter too much to Katshudo at the moment. What mattered to him was the fact that Team Seizen had returned to Konoha yesterday, and Rei had once again spent the night away from home. Considering what Katshudo knew about his little sister, he was almost 100% certain that Rei had been staying at Naruto's place. Personally, Katshudo didn't know how to handle this particular situation. This was in part because he didn't have enough information to make a decision. Rei could just be staying on Naruto's couch, sleeping in the same room as the boy, or even as a brother. It was best not to go down that line of thought. No matter what was actually going on, Katshudo was going to talk to Rei and figure out what to do. As long as Rei was honest about what was going on between her and Naruto, Katshudo figured he would be a fairly reasonable man. Just as Katshudo returned his mind to the present, Rei came walking up the steps. Katshudo noticed that when Rei noticed that he was waiting for her, she momentarily stopped walking. A more paranoid and overprotective brother might take her pause as a sign of guilt, but Katshudo figured she was simply surprised to see him. Once Rei had climbed the steps, he got up and said, "Good morning, little sister. Please, let's go inside and talk." Rei quickly bowed her head and followed her brother into the house. Once the siblings were inside the house, Katshudo led Rei over to the living room and gestured for her to sit down. After they had both sat down, Katshudo folded his hands and looked at Rei. For about a minute, the room was silent as Katshudo looked into his sister's eyes, as if he was trying to find something. Then he broke the silence and said, "Rei, I want you to answer my questions as truthfully as you can. Some of my questions may be difficult for you to answer. The gods know that it will be difficult for me to ask them, but I need you to be honest with me. As the acting head of the family while grandfather is away at the main fire temple, I need to know as much as I can before I make a decision." Rei nodded her head and nervously waited for Katshudo to start questioning her. Even though she didn't want to admit it, she had been expecting something like this for almost a month now. One doesn't need to be a ninja after all to tell if someone is sleeping in their bed at night or not. Katshudo closed his eyes and calmly said, "Did you stay over at Naruto's place last night?" Rei calmly nodded her head and waited for the next question. With a stern look on his face, Katshudo then said, "Did you sleep in the same room as Naruto?" Like before, Rei nodded her head. "Were you in the same bed as Naruto?" Once again, Rei nodded her head. Katshudo paused for a second to mentally prepare himself to ask the next question. "Did you bed Naruto?" Time seemed to stand still for Katshudo as he watched Rei slowly nod her head with a look of fear and a slight bit of shame in her eyes. Like any brother, Katshudo wanted to kill or at least castrate Naruto at that moment. However, now was not the time. Rage-induced comments and promises. Very slowly, in a cold tone, Katshudo said, "Explain." While he might be furious at what had happened, Katshudo was not about to pass judgment on his beloved sister over this until he knew everything so he could make a fair judgment. Rei looked down at the table and quietly said, "Last mission we had to kill a few squads of enemy soldiers in an unimportant area to misdirect enemy intelligence. Once the team came back to Konoha, I headed over to Naruto's apartment as I usually do. After dinner, Naruto and I got ready for bed, and then Rei couldn't continue talking about what had happened last night past that point, and her cheeks flamed up. A girl discussing her sex life with her brother was just not something that most girls could do. Closing his eyes, Katshudo prayed that he could have the patience to deal with this situation, and which that grandfather could have taken care of this problem. Grandfather was better able to handle these sorts of situations and had probably seen it coming while he had turned a blind eye to it. With the war going on and the two of them dating, he really should have thought of this possibility. Not only that, but there was also the fact that almost of Jinchuriki the Higurashi family had encountered in the past were linked to the family by marriage. The only reason why he and Rei didn't have a Jinchuriki ancestor was because of mere chance. Finally finding the best solution to the situation, Katshudo opened his eyes and said, "Rei, you are to go get Naruto, and if someone has power of attorney over him, then that person as well. As soon as Naruto and the person with power of attorney are here, we will draw up a marriage contract between you and Naruto." Once the contract is written up, you and Naruto will sign it. Then Rei, you will pack your things and move into Naruto's apartment. Katshudo looked at Rei's downcast figure, and he felt a pang of sadness within him. Then he reached over and gently lifted Rei's chin, so she was looking at him. In a gentle and loving manner, Katshudo said, "Sis, I still love you, never forget that or think that I don't love you. Also, I want you to know that you can still come over here anytime that you want. That means that you can use the family library just like you always do. It's just that there are consequences for every action that someone does, and the consequence of your actions is that you can't live here anymore." Rei looked at her brother and then slowly nodded her head. She had been raised to accept that she was in charge of what she did with her life, and thus she was in charge of her actions. This meant that the consequences of her actions, whether good or bad, were her responsibility. In this case, she would have to accept that her home for the past 15 years could no longer be her home. Naruto carefully set the box he was carrying down and turned to look at Rei Higer. No, it was Rei Uzumaki now, and had been for 3 hours now. It seemed so surreal to Naruto that he was married to Rei. Part of him still expected that he was going to wake up any second now and realized that this was all a dream. However, this was real and Rei was his wife. When he had woken up in the morning, Naruto had never suspected that he and Rei would be getting married today. Around 8 in the morning, Rei had shown up telling him that he needed to go to her house immediately. Once Naruto got to Rei's house, he found Jiraiya sitting next to Katshudo with a conflicted look on the Hokage's face. It was then that Naruto learned why he had been summoned by Katshudo. Naruto had never been as embarrassed as he had today when Katshudo revealed his new sex life to Jiraiya. After Katshudo had explained what was going on, Jiraiya and him had talked a bit about what to do about Rei and Naruto, with the duo in question listening in on everything. At first, Jiraiya had suggested the idea of delaying the wedding until either the war ended or Rei had a child. This was the usual practice among ninjas in order to help protect their loved ones. However, Katshudo had held firm that Naruto and Rei needed to wed, and in the end Jiraiya had capitulated. The two of them quickly wrote up a marriage contract and then had Rei and Naruto signed it. Rei noticed the look that Naruto was sending her and figured that he was remembering what had happened today. Knowing Naruto like she did, he was probably kicking himself for not resisting her and being afraid that she would be upset at him for their jutsu wedding. She then walked over, wrapped her arms around Naruto's neck, and then softly whispered, "It's okay, Naruto. Don't blame yourself. Everything will be just fine. I knew the consequences of betting you, and I chose to accept the consequences last night." Naruto then turned to face Rei and he said, "Are you sure, Rei? You honestly don't mind the fact that we were found out so quickly and that we're now married? I mean, I wanted to marry you, but that was in the future. I never expected it to be so soon." In answer to his question, Rei gently kissed Naruto and said, "Life's never something that you can expect, dear. Even with your bloodline, you should have realized that." Naruto gave a small smile at Rei's jib, and then he said, "Rei, what will we do? I mean, what will we do if you end up pregnant?" This question stopped Rei for a moment as she thought about it. In all of the excitement today, she hadn't considered that possibility. After giving it a few minutes of thought, Rei said, "We'll handle that when it comes up, Naruto. If I become pregnant, I'll transfer off of the field duty roster and teach at the academy or some other job in town. Yes, it would be slightly annoying to be out of the field, but on the other hand, it would help you out by giving you the parental version of the Rinnegan." When Rei saw the look of shock on Naruto's face, Rei started to smile, and then she said, "Don't worry, Naruto. I don't plan on becoming pregnant for a few years yet." Rei then got up and nodded to the bedroom. "Come, Naruto. We can finish unpacking all of my things in the morning. For now, I want you and me in our bed celebrating our wedding. After all, when the horse is out of the barn, there is no reason to lock it up anymore." Jiraiya sat in his office trying to focus on his work, but he just couldn't. His mind kept on drifting to Naruto and Rei's impromptu wedding. While Jiraiya could understand Katshudo's anger at the fact that Naruto and Rei had done the horizontal mumbo, he wasn't angry at all with either of the newlyweds. War was a deadly and stressful business. In the last war, Jiraiya had seen many ninjas, some just out of the academy, seeking comfort from each other in that particular manner. It was a coping mechanism for many to deal with all the death and destruction that war brings. There was another reason why Jiraiya didn't mind Naruto and Rei betting each other. Jiraiya might not have put as much stock in bloodline limits as many of the people on the council did, but he did recognize that bloodline limits were a useful tool. Given the dangers inherent in war, it would be all too easy for Naruto to die and have the Rinnegan disappear forever. Now Jiraiya was not about to lock Naruto up for breeding purposes, but he would definitely try to encourage the new Uzumaki couple to start having kids. Putting his pen down on his desk, Jiraiya just sighed and said, "Maybe I should assign Naruto and raid a village defense for 2 or 3 years. Give them time to get used to marriage, hone their skills, and maybe have a child or two. Both of them are good ninjas, but there are still better ninjas that could be out in the field if they weren't needed to defend the village. Besides, Naruto's Rinnegan makes him even more useful than a Hyuga when it comes to watching out for enemies, and Konoha doesn't have too many seal masters. Regrettably, the war will probably still be going on by then. What should I do about Iori? The boy's a good ninja, but from what I've read and seen, I don't think he could take a long stint at being a village guard. I can't constantly give that kid missions to do or immediately reassign him without raising the Uzumaki's suspicions. Love those two, but I don't want them mad at me. Wait a second. One of the liaisons with Suna will be coming home next month. I'll just offer Iori the position of third liaison to Suna next month. That way I can get the most out of my ninjas without causing anyone to go stir crazy." Pain stood before Madara in Madara's secret throne room. The supposed head of Akatsuki then said, "It has been several months, Lord Madara, since this current war started. All hopes that it would be quickly resolved have been pointless. Also, we have underestimated the amount of revenue this war would generate for the various hidden villages. If the war somehow ended today, we would have to wait almost a decade for the villages to reach the required economic levels for our plans." Madara listened to Pain's words and wished that he could have called Pain a liar. However, Madara had learned long ago that at times things just didn't go your way, and this was apparently one of those times. Oh, he was frustrated beyond all measure that Akatsuki was almost useless to him now. But except for the fact that his plans had been destroyed, Madara didn't care about how the war was going. Unknown to anyone except perhaps Itachi, Madara was dying. The eternal Manjikyu Sharingan had vastly prolonged Madara's life, but it had not truly granted him eternal life. There was only one way that Madara could save his own life, and that was to gain a demonic body. He couldn't use Orochimaru's body-swapping jutsu because of his eyes; they bound him to his body. Madara had formed Akatsuki for the sole purpose of collecting the 9 bijou. Once all the demons were captured, he had planned to force them to transform his body into a demonic one in exchange for their freedom, thus cheating death. Now, with this damn war, Madara had resigned himself to his death. He had spent the past few months trying to rework his calculations to try and use the 3 Jinchuriki only for his plans, but in the end he had given up. The King of Hell statue, which was critical to his plan of forcing the bijou to transform him, needed all 9 bijou sealed within it in order to work. Turning to face Pain, Madara said, "Listen to me, Pain. I will be leaving shortly to prepare myself for my end." On seeing the shocked look on Pain's face, Madara chuckled and said, "I am old, Pain. Too old. By the time the bijou return to the mortal world, I will be dead. Therefore, I am leaving command of Akatsuki to you, so you now truly are the leader just like everyone else believes. Before I go, however, I leave you with an order and a give. My final order is to destroy Konoha. As a gift, I will use my contacts to gain official pardons for those members of Akatsuki who hail from the so-called Circle Alliance. Use their pardons to incorporate Akatsuki into AIM's military as high-rank officers." In his mind, Pain was crying at the loss of his father figure and cursing the very concept of war. Thanks to war, he had lost his family, lost Yahiko, and now was losing the closest thing to a father he had ever had. He had stopped considering Jiraiya as a father figure long ago, ever since the Toad Sannin had abandoned him and his friends. Pain nodded his head and said, "As you wish, Lord Madara. I shall do exactly as you instruct, and Konoha will be burnt to the ground." The end.